on. The capital circle knows well that the eldest miss of the Jian family suffers from a severe paranoia and hyperacusis. Everyone must walk on their knees in front of her, terrified that making the slightest noise will infuriate her. Yet, to pay off their debts, my parents brought me, who had been raised in the countryside for 18 years, back overnight to give me to the eldest miss. On the very first day, the butler told me the rules of the Jiang household. Any kind of noise is strictly forbidden. Miss Jiang has hyperacusis. Any high decibel sound will make her extremely displeased. The last servant who broke a cup was already thrown onto the back mountain to feed the wolves. My heart tightened violently, and my face grew a few shades paler. The butler raised his hand, pointing toward the dark, narrow end of the staircase. Second, you are absolutely never allowed to go to the third floor. That is a forbidden zone. No matter what sound you hear, do not go up there, unless you want to die. The butler's warning carried no emotion whatsoever, yet it made one's spine chill more than any beating or scolding. I nodded obediently. I will remember. The butler seemed somewhat satisfied with my compliance, and led me to a guest room at the end of the second-floor hallway. Mr. Gu, get some rest early. Remember, do not go out at night. The door closed, shutting out the butler's pair of dead, lifeless eyes. The room was huge, but there was only a bed and a wardrobe, as desolate as a morgue. I didn't dare turn on the main light, leaving only a dim, yellow bedside lamp on. I didn't take a hot shower, because I was afraid the sound of water would be too loud and violate the taboo. I simply used a towel to dry my hair and body, then changed into a pair of cotton, long-sleeved pajamas. Those were clothes I had brought myself, infused with my specially made calming incense. Only by smelling this faint scent of herbs could my heart, which was hanging in midair, settle down just a little bit. Curled up under the blanket with my hands clasped together, I comforted myself like self-hypnosis. Yes, Gu Yenshin, as long as the debt is paid off, you can leave. Thunder rumbled outside the window. I slept extremely fitfully this night. I don't know how much time passed before a loud crash exploded without warning. In the dead silence of the night, it didn't sound like thunder, but more like a heavy object being slammed violently against a wall, carrying a force meant to destroy everything. Startled awake completely, my whole body bounced up from the bed. Before I could even react, there was immediately another sharp shatter. That was the sound of precious porcelain being swept to the floor and smashed into pieces. The sound came from the third floor right above me. Get out. All of you, get out. A woman's scream pierced through the floorboards and traveled down. That voice was hoarse, permeated with a pain on the verge of collapse, like a trapped, caged, completely maddened beast. The villa, which had been dead silent, instantly came alive. The lights throughout the entire house suddenly flared up. In the hallway came chaotic, yet deliberately muffled footsteps. Wrapped in the blanket, I curled up in the corner of the bed, trembling all over. Even through a layer of floorboards, I could feel the monstrous rage radiating from that woman, and her desire for destruction. Is this the legendary eldest miss of the capital circle? Is this the forbidden zone the butler spoke of? Outside the door, the suppressed weeping of a maid could faintly be heard, along with the butler's anxious, hushed tones. The sedative. Go find the doctor quickly. The miss is having another episode. Butler, nobody dares to go up. Going up means certain death. Even if it means certain death, you have to go. Otherwise, we will all die. Amidst the chaos, I smelled a faint scent that seemed to begin spreading through the air. I tightly clutched the small medicine pouch in my arms, my knuckles turning white from the sheer force. The hallway had turned into a complete mess. When I pushed open the bedroom door, I saw several uniformed maids, crowding around the staircase, their faces deathly pale. They held trays in their hands, and the medicine bowls on the trays were clinking loudly against each other from their trembling hands. I don't dare to go, one said hastily. Last time Fei went in, her head was smashed open. I don't dare to either. The miss is holding a knife right now. The servants pushed and shoved each other, none of them willing to take that step. The old butler stood to the side, his brow furrowed deeply, his expression so dark it looked like it could drop water. Suddenly, his gaze swept over to me as I stood at the doorway with a panicked face. At that exact moment, a glint of light flashed through the butler's originally dead and lifeless eyes. The butler walked over with quick steps, not even giving me any time to react, and snatched the tray directly from the maid's hands. shoving it right into my arms. The medicine bowl was scalding hot. My fingers recoiled from the heat, but I didn't dare let go. The butler's voice was cold and harsh, carrying a command that brooked no argument. Mr. Gu, since you have come to the Jiang family, you must know the rules of the Jiang family. The Mrs. Head ailment has flared up. This is the sedative and the calming soup. Take them up. I looked at him in disbelief. But you just said the third floor is a forbidden zone. That is for normal times. Mr. Gu, why the Gu family sent you here? You know very well in your heart. If something happens to the miss tonight, do you think the Gu family will still get the money? These words were like a slap across the face, viciously striking my face. A human commodity can be replaced if it's broken, and compensation can be paid if it dies, but nothing must happen to Jiang Wanning. I looked down at the medicine in my arms, then looked up at that pitch-black entrance to the third-floor staircase. I understand, my voice was trembling, but the steps beneath my feet still moved forward. The lights were not turned on the third floor. Stepping into it felt as though I had entered another world. The light behind me was swallowed by the darkness. The air was thick with a nauseating, heavy smell of blood, as well as an indescribable, chilling aura as if entering a wild beast's lair. Outside the window, a flash of lightning ripped through the night sky, the deathly pale electric light instantly illuminating a corner of the room. I gasped sharply. The originally luxurious study looked as though it had just been hit by a tornado. Priceless Ming Dynasty, blue and white porcelain, had turned into a floor full of shards. The expensive mahogany desk was overturned on the ground, and the books covering the walls were torn to shreds, scattered everywhere like corpses. Yet, that woman was nowhere within my line of sight. My heart jumped into my throat. Holding the tray, I tried my best to tiptoe, wanting to avoid the mess on the floor, place the medicine on an intact coffee table, and run. 1 step, 2 steps. I held my breath. However, right at the exact moment I was about to set the tray down, an extremely tiny, sharp crack exploded in the dead silence of the darkness. My entire body froze. An overlooked porcelain shard beneath my foot snapped in two beneath the sole of my shoe. This sound wasn't loud. It was even quieter than the sound of the rain outside the window. But to the hyperacusis, afflicted Jiang Wanning, this was undoubtedly an ear-piercing clap of thunder. The sound of breathing deep within the darkness suddenly ceased. My scalp went numb, and a terror of being locked onto by an apex predator instantly crept over my entire body. I instinctively wanted to back away, wanted to run away, when an incredibly cold voice came out from the shadows. Who is it? Before I could even see clearly, a fierce wind wrapped in the scent of blood had already slammed into my face. The tray in my hands was flipped over, and the medicine bowl smashed onto the ground. Before I could even scream out loud, a cold, pale hand had already clamped tightly around my throat. My entire body was violently slammed against the wall by a brutal and violent surge of immense force. With the help of the lightning that lit up outside the window once again, I finally saw the woman in front of me clearly. A black camisole exposed her delicate collarbones, and her cold, aristocratic face was currently filled entirely with hostility. In those narrow, slanting phoenix eyes, there was not a single shred of focus, only a terrifying sheet of crimson. That was the madness that follows the complete collapse of sanity's control. At this moment, Jiang Wanning was not a human, but a ghost, a demon that had just crawled out of hell. She stared at me, as if staring at a lifeless, dead object. Who let you in? Are you looking for death? Along with her interrogation, the hand clamped around my neck, squeezed tighter and tighter. My face instantly flushed a deep red, and the air in my lungs was squeezed out bit by bit. I tried desperately to pry her hand away, but that hand was like an iron pillar, not moving in the slightest. The fear of death shrouded me, and my instinct to survive made me want to open my mouth to scream, to cry out for help. But the very moment the sound rushed to my throat, the old butler's sinister warning exploded like thunder. Inside my mind, any kind of noise is strictly forbidden, otherwise you die. I couldn't scream. Screaming would only make me die faster. I forced myself to swallow that scream back down. Amidst the daze brought on by suffocation, my right hand, which could still move, reached tremblingly into my pajama pocket. That was my last saving straw. A thumb-sized Storax aromatic pill, sealed in beeswax. This was an ancient formula left behind by my grandfather before he passed away, specifically used to treat severe mania and psychosis. because the production process was extremely tedious. I had only managed to make this single pill in total, and had always kept it close to me as a secret. As my fingertips brushed against that cold wax shell, I used the absolute last ounce of strength in my body to suddenly crush the wax shell. A sharp, clear, chilly yet strangely milky sweet herbal fragrance instantly exploded between us. In that extremely narrow space, disregarding everything else, I held up the crushed aromatic pill and thrust it hard right beneath Jiang Wanting's nose. At the same time, my hand took advantage of the momentum to climb onto her stiff neck. Relying on the muscle memory from practicing medicine for many years, I precisely pressed down on those two, throbbing Anmian acupoints behind her ears. A painful grunt escaped Jiang Wanting's throat. I didn't dare to stop, applying pressure with the pads of my fingers. While forcing the fragrance to drill into her nose, I coordinated it with a special massage technique, even completely disregarding the risks to press her temples. 1 second, 2 seconds, a miracle happened. That unique medicinal fragrance overbearingly dispersed the heavy smell of blood and tobacco filling the room. Jiang Wanting's fingers, which had still been tightening, seemed to have a pause button pressed on them. Inside those crimson, turbid phoenix eyes, the frantic, murderous intent began to dissipate bit by bit. Jiang Wanting's lips moved slightly, her voice incredibly hoarse. The excruciating pain that had tortured her for years was receding, replaced by an overwhelming sense of comfort that made her very soul tremble. This scent is so fragrant, I want to get just a little bit closer. The next second, I felt the restriction around my neck completely vanish. Jiang Wanting released her grip. Immediately after, that woman, who just a moment ago had been like a sure fiend, seemed to have all the bones drained from her body, and her torso fell forward without any warning. I had just breathed in a mouthful of fresh air, and hadn't even had time to cough, before I was compressed by this sudden weight, losing my balance. I landed flat on my butt on the thick wool carpet, while that eldest miss of the capital circle was now pressing her entire body flat against me. That noble head of hers was buried heavily directly into the crook of my neck. I was so terrified that my entire body stiffened up. My hands hung frozen in midair, unable to push her away, yet unable to hold her either. I could feel that Jiang Wanting's body was frighteningly scalding hot. That was the high fever that followed a bipolar mania episode. Yet she was ridiculously well behaved right now. That lunatic, who usually held a knife even while sleeping, currently seemed like a feline animal suffering from extreme skin hunger. Nuzzling her cheek continuously against the crook of my neck, she was looking for the source of that scent. Just now, that aromatic pill had been crushed in my hand, and since I had just finished bathing, my body naturally carried a faint fragrance to begin with. The two scents blended together, becoming the most addictive poison Jiang Wanting had ever smelled. Jiang Wanting's hands tightened unconsciously, wrapping around my waist. "Don't move." She took a deep breath, her nose pressed against the throbbing blood vessel on the side of my neck, letting out a satisfied, hoarse murmur. The scent made my scalp go numb, and I didn't dare move a single inch. I waited for a few seconds. The expected violent outburst did not come. What came from beside my ear was actually the woman's gradually stabilizing, and even somewhat heavy, sound of breathing. She had fallen asleep in this study that had just been smashed to pieces by her, and resembled a wasteland, in the arms of this stranger whom she had almost choked to death. This eldest miss, who suffered from severe insomnia, and reportedly hadn't closed her eyes for 3 days and 3 nights, had actually fallen asleep in seconds. The first ray of morning sunlight poured in through the shattered floor-to-ceiling window, illuminating the floor full of messy antique fragments, and also illuminating the corner, where those two figures were tangled together. I was woken up by a heavy pressure on my legs. I opened my eyes dazedly, my entire body aching as if it had been run over by a truck. In particular, my legs had long since lost all sensation, so numb that they felt like they didn't belong to me anymore. The moment my memories flooded back, I sucked in a sharp breath of cold air. On my thighs, a black head was currently resting. It was Jiang Wanting. This terrifying eldest miss of the capital circle was currently lying on her side on the carpet, her head pillowed on my knees, with her entire face almost buried into my stomach. She was sleeping extremely deeply, her breathing long, slow, and steady. That face, which had been contorted like a fiend last night, currently under the morning light, actually showed a hint of sickly paleness and compliance. If one ignored the surrounding ruins, This scene was as beautiful as a painting, but I didn't dare to move, because I discovered that one of Zhang Waning's hands was clutching a corner of my pajamas in a death grip. Is this what skin hunger is like? I swallowed a mouthful of saliva, attempting to carefully rescue the corner of my clothes from her clutches. I gently moved my fingers, wanting to pry her hand open. However, the exact moment my fingertips touched those tightly closed phoenix eyes opened without any warning. My heart stopped from the fright, my hand freezing in midair, wanting to pull it back, but not daring to. "You're awake," I said, terrified that this lunatic would choke my neck again in the next second. Zhang Waning didn't say a word. She still maintained her posture of pillowing on my legs, without even moving a single bit. Those eyes locked onto my face without blinking. My legs were incredibly numb, and unable to bear it any longer. I instinctively tried to shrink my body back a little. Zhang Waning's brow furrowed slightly, seemingly displeased with the heat source that was moving away from her. "Who permitted you to move?" The next second, she made a movement that caused my entire body to go rigid. Not only did she not get up, but she suddenly raised her hand and grabbed my wrist in a firm grip, pulling my entire person forward. Caught off guard, my upper body leaned forward, and my face almost collided with the tip of her nose. Miss Zhang Waning ignored my panic. She pressed her nose against the thin layer of skin on the inside of my wrist, taking a deep, long sniff. That was the spot where I had crushed the Storax aromatic pill last night. Even though a night had passed, that sharp, chilly herbal fragrance still lingered within the textures of my skin. This was the only scent that could make her brain quiet down. Zhang Waning's gaze darkened significantly in an instant, the startling possessiveness in the depths of her eyes no longer concealed. "It really is you." Right at this moment, which was ambiguous to the absolute extreme, yet dangerous to the absolute extreme, the heavy door of the study was carefully pushed open from the outside by someone. The old butler's lowered voice carried inside, "Walk lightly. Are the body bags ready? Move quickly once we get in. Don't let the blood stain the carpet." Immediately after, the butler brought in the Jian family's private doctor, along with 2 bodyguards holding a stretcher and cleaning tools, stepping inside on their tiptoes. They had all prepared themselves mentally. With such a huge commotion last night, Gu Yanqin was probably already dead and cold by now. Either his neck had been snapped, or his throat had been slit by a porcelain shard. However, when the group of people bypassed the screen and clearly saw the scene inside the room, everyone's footsteps ground to a sudden halt. The butler widened his turbid old eyes, his jaw nearly dropping to the floor, while the doctor dropped the stethoscope in his hand straight onto the carpet. What did they see? In the center of the messy ruins, their eldest miss, who was usually violently aggressive and killed anyone who touched her, was currently like a clingy little kitten, lazily staying in my arms. She kept one hand locked around my wrist, her posture so casual as if I were her private body pillow. Meanwhile, I, who was supposed to be dead and cold, was blushing furiously, staring at the doorway in utter helplessness. At this group of people who looked like they had just seen a ghost. "Have you seen enough?" Zhang Wanning had no intention of getting up, not even bothering to turn her head, still maintaining her posture of pillowing on my legs, only lifting her eyelids lazily. "Get out." The butler shuddered violently, cold sweat breaking out instantly. "Forgive us, miss. We will leave right away." The group of people came fast, but scrambled out even faster. The door was closed once again, leaving just the 2 of us in the room once more. I felt as though I were being roasted over a fire right now, and tried to pull my hand back. "Miss Zhang, they've all left. Could you please get up first? My legs are really numb." Zhang Wanning finally released my wrist. She sat up unhurriedly from the carpet, her black silk camisole dress clinging wrinkly to her body. Yet it did not diminish her noble, decadent aura in the slightest. She raised her hand to rub her temples. The agonizing pain from last night that felt like it would blow her brains apart had vanished, replaced by a long-lost clarity. This was the first time in the past 3 years that she had slept for a full 5 hours. Zhang Wanning turned her head, her gaze landing once again on me, as I vigorously rubbed my legs, looking soft and easily bullied, yet having a tenacious will to live. "This is my medicine." Zhang Wanning reached out her hand and gently hooked my chin. "Your legs are numb?" A half-smile played at the corners of her lips. "Since they are numb, then there is no need for you to leave." "What?" "I gave your Du family a chance. You walked in here on your own. Jiang Wanning released her hand, her fingertips sliding down my face, finally stopping on my neck, where finger marks had been choked into it last night. Her movements gentle, as if caressing a rare and priceless treasure. From today onward, you will live in this room. You are not allowed to go anywhere. The air in the room seemed to freeze. After Jiang Wanning said those words, there was no further elaboration. She stood up from beside me, her bare feet stepping onto the messy carpet. She walked over to the surviving sofa, picked up the black suit jacket draped over it, and put it on unhurriedly. Finally, she picked up a string of cold white jade Bodhi beads from the coffee table. Jiang Wanning wrapped them loop by loop around her left wrist. Supporting myself against a cabinet, I stood up with great difficulty, my legs still a bit numb from the prolonged lack of circulation. I looked at this woman before me who had regained her composure, took a deep breath, and plucked up the courage to break the silence. Miss Jiang, I delivered the medicine last night, and your headache has been relieved. Can I leave now? Jiang Wanning's movements in straightening her clothes paused slightly. She turned around, those cold phoenix eyes crossing a distance of several meters, to land faintly upon me. Leave? Where to? Back to the Gu family? My fingers curled tightly. You don't need to trouble yourself with that. As long as I have paid off the debt. Jiang Wanning looked as if she had just heard a joke. She casually reached into a pile of documents on the coffee table and pulled out a thin piece of paper. My eyelids twitched. I recognized that paper. It was the debt compensation agreement my stepmother had signed, and also my contract of indenture. The black ink on white paper, combined with that staggering sum of tens of millions, felt like a massive mountain crushing down so hard I could barely breathe. Jiang Wanning held the paper between two fingers, waving it half-heartedly. When the Gu family sent you in, they gave this thing to me. Gu Yanqin, you study medicine too. You should know what equal exchange means, right? My heart tightened, and an ominous premonition welled up within me. The next second, the crisp sound of striking metal echoed. With her other hand, Jiang Wanning produced a silver lighter. My pupils contracted sharply. What are you trying to do? Jiang Wanning didn't answer me. She simply brought that IOU worth tens of millions close to the flame. Flames instantly engulfed the paper. I instinctively lunged forward a step, trying to snatch it. No, that's mine. But it was all too late. The paper burned incredibly fast. In just a few short seconds, it turned into a clump of ash right at Jiang Wanning's fingertips. As the last spark went out, I froze on the spot, my whole body feeling as if it had been struck by lightning. It was gone. Jiang Wanning brushed off the non-existent dust from her hands, her tone so casual as if she were discussing today's weather. Now, the Gu family doesn't owe me any money. I stared blankly at the ashes on the floor. They don't owe anything anymore. Then am I free? I lifted my head, my voice trembling, carrying a sliver of unbelievable hope. What do you mean? Are you saying I can leave? Jiang Wanning let out a low chuckle, tinged with a hair-raising amusement and mockery. She took long strides, walking toward me step by step. Gu Yanqin, did you study so much that you went stupid? I burned the IOU because I don't care about that little bit of money. But that doesn't mean you can leave. Then you, Jiang Wanning interrupted me, you cured my headache. To a patient, you are the only effective medicine. How can medicine grow legs and run away? My entire body went rigid, a chill rushing from the soles of my feet straight to the crown of my head. Is she trying to back out on the deal? No. It wasn't backing out on a deal. She wanted to monopolize me. Miss Jiang, I am a person, not medicine. And I have a name. My name is Gu Yanqin. Jiang Wanning's fingers gently pinched my earlobe, kneading it carelessly. I know. The name Gu Yanqin spilled from her red lips, the final syllable deliberately drawn out, carrying a lingering, intimate overtone that could make one's ears tingle. The tips of my ears instantly turned bright red, out of a mix of humiliation and anger. Jiang Wanning pulled back that trace of playfulness, her gaze instantly becoming cold, sharp, dominant, and absolute. Listen carefully. From today on, you belong to Jiang Manhwa. You have only one task, and that is to cure my illness. She withdrew her hand and stood up straight, as if handing down a final verdict. The butler will move all your things to the 3rd floor. From now on, you will live right next door to me. My eyes widened. But isn't the 3rd floor a forbidden zone? Jiang Wanning turned and walked outward, the cold white jade Buddhist beads on her wrist gleaming with a gentle, moist luster under the morning light. When she reached the doorway, Her steps paused slightly. She turned her head, leaving behind a sentence that drove me into utter despair. It is for others. For you, it is a cage. Remember, be at my beck and call. If I can't see you when my head hurts. If I can't see you when my head hurts. I don't mind making the Goo family pay back those tens of millions with interest, leaving me all alone leaning against the wall, looking at the mess all over the floor and that small pile of ash, wanting to cry but having no tears. The third floor was the forbidden zone of Jiang Manor. The staircase leading up here was covered with a dark gray, long pile carpet. The moving process was eerily silent. There were no noisy shouts of direction, and no collision sounds of heavy objects hitting the ground. Several servants looked like pantomime actors, who had undergone special training, holding my pitifully small luggage in their hands, their movements so gentle, as if what they held in their hands was fragile foam that would break at a touch. Following at the very end of the line, the moment I stepped into the third-floor hallway, a suffocating sense of vacuum slammed into my face. This place was like a giant, soundproof box cut off from the noise of the human world, or a specially made cage, meant to imprison some sort of monster. The old butler stopped before a heavy mahogany door. "Mr. Goo, this is your room," pushing open the door. The room was huge, and the decoration was luxurious to the extreme, but the color tone was still a freezing cold gray and white. What caught my attention the most was that the left side of this room was a thick wall, and right on the other side of that wall was Jiang Wanning's master bedroom. The butler seemed to read my thoughts, and inside those turbid eyes lurked a meaningful warning. The miss is right next door. Although this wall has been given top-tier soundproofing treatment, the miss's auditory acuity is several times that of an ordinary person. Therefore, he turned around, and from the tray in a servant's hands, picked up a pair of white cotton slippers, and placed them by my feet. The butler straightened his back, his voice suppressed to an extreme low, as if reading an imperial edict. "These are specially made soft-soled shoes. These are specially made soft-soled shoes. Mr. Goo, please be absolutely sure to remember the survival rules of the third floor. The sound of footsteps, the sound of closing doors, the sound of picking up or putting down objects, and even the sound of your swallowing when drinking water." He held up two withered, bony fingers, gesturing a despairing number, "must all be controlled under 20 decibels. Looking at that pair of shoes, I only felt my throat tighten, a chill rushing up from the soles of my feet. What if I accidentally exceed it? The butler looked at me expressionlessly, his turbid eyeballs moving slightly, as he spat out a cold sentence. "The last servant who accidentally made a sound was carried out, and no one has ever seen him again. Mr. Goo, you are Miss Jiang's medicine. Ms. Jiang might spare your life, but I'm afraid physical suffering cannot be avoided." After saying this, the butler waved his hand, and the servants quickly receded like shadows, and even the sound of the closing door was controlled to be extremely faint. Only I was left in the room, and a death-like silence instantly submerged me. I took a deep breath, changed into that pair of soft-soled shoes, and stepped onto the carpet. Sure enough, there wasn't a single sound. I walked over to the window, wanting to pull open those heavy curtains to get some fresh air. Just as my hand touched the fabric, my movements froze violently again. If the curtain rings made a sound, I wouldn't dare to take the risk. Subsequently, I slowly squatted down and opened my own battered suitcase. Inside, there were no designer clothes, only a few changes of clothing, several ancient traditional Chinese medicine texts with frayed edges, and a set of medicine grinding pots made of fine jade. This was a smooth jade medicine pestle left to me by my grandfather, holding it heavily in my hand. It had a reassuring weight. I took out the medicine pot and cradled it gently in my arms. This was my only weapon, and also the tool I relied on to make a living. The sleeping dragon next door could wake up at any moment. I had to be prepared at all times, to use my incense and my medicine, to exchange for a sliver of a chance at survival in this suffocating world. From this moment on, I would settle here. I lowered my eyes, the pads of my fingers caressing the slightly cool medicine pestle. In the depths of my eyes, a flash of resilience appeared that did not match my frail appearance. As long as she doesn't kill me, I can find a way to tame her. Lunchtime. The dining room of Jiang Manor was ridiculously large, and everything was luxurious to the extreme. But sitting by the dining table, I only felt that this place was like an execution ground. Jiang Wanning required someone to accompany her for meals. But she did not speak, nor did she look at me. We were separated by a distance of 2 meters, and I could even clearly feel the low barometric pressure radiating from her body. The entire meal was eaten in a dead atmosphere. A row of servants stood around, each with their heads lowered, not even daring to breathe with any force. I pinched the silver chopsticks in my hand, picking up every single grain of rice with extreme caution, terrified that the chopsticks would hit the porcelain bowl and make a sound. The food tasted like wax, and I only hoped to quickly end this suffocating lunch. But Jiang Wanning suddenly opened her mouth, her voice edged with impatience. A young maid standing to her rear left hurriedly stepped forward. By her appearance, she seemed to be a newcomer. She nervously held a crystal water pitcher, and by the time she walked to Jiang Wanning's side, her hands were already shaking uncontrollably. I looked at that maid's hand, which was shaking like chaff, and my heart leaped into my throat. Truly, the more one fears something, the more it happens. Right at the exact moment the pitcher's spout neared the rim of the cup, the maid's hand shook violently. The edge of the pitcher's lid clinked against the paper-thin wall of the crystal cup. The sound was as sharp as a blade, instantly slicing through the dead silent air. At that instant, I felt the surrounding air freeze over completely. That maid was frightened out of her wits. She trembled, wanting to kneel down and beg for mercy. Miss Jiang Wanning, who had been cutting her steak, suddenly ground her movements to a halt. I watched with my own eyes as she gripped the steak knife with that hand, her knuckles turning white, and a visible aura of violence exploded out from her body. What was just a crisp clink to an ordinary person was, to the hyperacusis afflicted Jiang Wanning, as if someone were taking countless steel needles and stabbing them viciously into her eardrums, piercing all the way along the auditory nerve into the depths of her brain. It was a piercing, bone-deep pain. Jiang Wanning didn't lift her head. She waved her hand with extreme coldness. The next second, 2 ghost-like bodyguards in black instantly stepped forward. Their movements were so practiced, it made one's heart skip a beat. One person swiftly pinned the maid's arms behind her back from behind. The other person directly used a piece of black cloth to gag her mouth tightly, because they knew that if they let her scream out loud because of fear, the consequences would not be as simple as just being dragged away. The maid widened her eyes, tears bursting from them. Her gaze filled completely with despair and a plea for help. She looked toward me, but there was nothing I could do. I could only sit rigidly on my chair, watching with my own eyes as a living, breathing person was noiselessly dragged out of the dining room. In less than 10 seconds, the dining room returned to its deathly silence. I only felt a chill rush straight up my spine, to the crown of my head, leaving my hands and feet icy cold. I looked down at the silver chopsticks in my own hands. My fingers began to tremble violently beyond control. Just now, that was the sound of a water pitcher clinking. What if it were me, and my chopsticks hit the bowl while I was eating? Or what if, when I was drinking soup, I made a swallowing sound? Would the fate of being dragged away be my tomorrow? A cold voice suddenly rang out. Why aren't you eating anymore? I startled violently, lifting my head right into Jiang Wanning's bottomless eyes. She was currently holding a napkin, unhurriedly wiping her fingers. I opened my mouth, my voice trembling. Are you afraid? Jiang Wanning casually tossed aside her napkin. She leaned her body back against the chair. Her gaze scanned across my pale face, the corner of her mouth curling into a cruel arc. Gu Yangqin, I keep you around because you are useful. But if you turn out to be a piece of trash who makes noise. She did not finish her sentence, but the freezing, lethal meaning in the depths of her eyes had already explained everything. I tightly gripped the chopsticks in my hand, my fingernails sinking into my palm, using that bit of pain to force myself to calm down. I couldn't fall apart, and I couldn't make a mistake. After that maid was dragged away, the air in the dining room felt as if it had been completely sucked dry. Jiang Wanning did not feel relieved just because she had punished the instigator. On the contrary, that crisp clinking sound from just now was like a nail exploding inside her head. The aftermath had not settled. Her auditory nerves were still throbbing violently, and every single nerve ending screamed with pain. That sensation was as if countless electric drills were drilling into her temples at the same time. Jiang Wanning's gaze was like a sharp blade, shooting directly at me, who was sitting across from her. At this time, I was still holding that pair of silver chopsticks in my hand, my entire body stiff from the fright just now. The tips of the chopsticks hung in midair, but I didn't dare lower them. Looking at my trembling and terrified appearance, the mania inside Jiang Wanning's heart flared up even more. Are you holding those chopsticks to put on a show? Do you want to make some noise too, so the bodyguards can drag you out? This was pure, unadulterated venting of anger. I was so scared my shoulders shrunk back, and the chopsticks in my hand almost really dropped onto the table. Driven by an extreme desire to survive, I stuttered, "No, Miss Jiang, I eat very quietly. I won't disturb you." As soon as these words left my mouth, I braced myself to be violently berated by her. However, the expected explosive rage did not descend. The entire dining room suddenly fell into an eerie silence. Jiang Wanning's fingers, which had been rubbing her temples, halted without any warning. Those phoenix eyes of hers, which were always filled with irritability and gloom, now rarely revealed a trace of utter stillness. Just a moment ago, the instant my voice traveled into her ears, she thought it would be like everyone else's, disgusting her like fingernails scratching across a chalkboard. But there was none of that. That voice lightly drilled into her eardrums, brushing past her auditory nerves that were tense to the absolute limit. Not only did it not hurt, but it actually brought a tingling, soothing sensation, like a pair of gentle hands, thoughtfully smoothing out the exploding wrinkles inside her mind. Her temples, which had been throbbing violently, actually eased up miraculously. She scanned my pale face. Jiang Wanning's expression suddenly changed. Those cold eyes of hers locked onto me in a death grip. That look was no longer the disgust of looking at garbage, but a dark, probing gaze as if she had discovered a whole new world. I waited for a long time without hearing any movement, so I quietly peeked open one eye, only to crash directly into Jiang Wanning's intense, unblinking eyes. My heart skipped a panicked beat, thinking that the volume of my voice just now had still been too loud. I frantically tried to apologize. I'm sorry. Shut up. I immediately fell silent, snapping my mouth shut tightly. Jiang Wanning leaned back against her chair, her slender fingers tapping lightly on the tabletop. Come here. My skin crawled with anxiety, but I didn't dare disobey. I could only put down my chopsticks and shuffle over to her side. I kept my head lowered, not even daring to breathe loudly. Jiang Wanning turned her body, narrowing her eyes, as her gaze swept across my face. Say what you just said again. I was dumbfounded. At that moment, my mind went completely blank, unable to keep up with this lunatic's train of thought at all. Which phrase from just now? Under extreme tension and confusion, my eyes went wide. Huh? This syllable was short, soft, and gentle, filled completely with ignorance and silliness. Yet when it hit Jiang Wanning's ears, it was like a piece of soft candy, gently bouncing against her eardrum. Her originally tightly furrowed brow completely smoothed out, and the violent, blood-red color in the depths of her eyes finally faded entirely. As expected, it wasn't an illusion. He is my medicine. Not just his body and scent, but even his voice was a sedative specifically tailored for me. By God himself. Stupid to death. Yet there was no actual anger in her tone. Instead, it carried a lazy aura that could make one's heart race. Her mood inexplicably turned for the better. Sit down and accompany me for lunch. Jiang Wanning picked up her knife and fork again. This time, her movements were elegant and composed. Without any of the previous irritability, I stood on the spot, my mind a complete mess. The afternoon sunlight was somewhat piercing, filtering through the gap in the study's heavy curtains. Like a golden blade, cutting through the dimness of the room, Jiang Wanning sat in her black leather office chair. A mountain-high stack of documents piled in front of her, but she couldn't process a single word. Although she had slept last night, the aftermath of her mania still surged like a tide, repeatedly battering her nerves. Those densely packed characters turned into a swarm of crawling ants in her eyes, making her temples throb violently. The violent urge in her heart was about to break free from her control again. If this were the past, this stack of documents, worth billions, would have already been torn to shreds by her. But today, she had a new way to vent, or rather, a new way to get relief. Jiang Wanning pressed down the intercom on the desk to call him in. In less than 2 minutes, the heavy door of the study was pushed open a crack, wearing those soft-soled shoes. I carefully slipped inside. Miss John, you were looking for me? I stood at a spot about 3 meters away from the desk and stopped. My hands were clasped in front of me, maintaining a stance that looked ready to run away at any second. Jiang Wanning lifted her eyelids and glanced at me. Why stand so far away? Afraid I'll eat you? She casually picked up a thick financial report completely in English from the desk, and tossed it heavily toward the corner of the table, making a dull thud. "Come here." I had no choice but to shuffle my steps over. Jiang Wanning tilted her chin toward a spot beside the desk. "Sit." Without my noticing, a small round stool had appeared there, complete with a soft cushion, looking completely out of place. In this cold, imposing study, I sat down obediently. Jiang Wanning pointed at the financial report and said concisely, "Read it to me." I froze for a moment, picking up the heavy document and flipping to the first page. The densely packed jargon and English words instantly made my head spin. Read this? I studied traditional Chinese medicine. Although my English grades were quite good, these dull business acquisition clauses and financial terms were practically a foreign language to me. Jiang Wanning leaned back against her chair, closing her eyes as she raised a hand to press her temples. "Otherwise, do you want to chant scriptures? Make your voice louder. Don't sound like you haven't eaten." I didn't dare talk back. Taking a deep breath, I cradled the document and began to read haltingly. At the very beginning, my voice carried a noticeable tension and trembling. Whenever I hit an unfamiliar professional term, I would get stuck, and my pronunciation carried a trace of uncertain hesitation. If this had been a normal situation, where a subordinate reporting on work stuttered to this extent, Jiang Wanning would have long since had them thrown out. But right now, as that soft, gentle voice echoed in the dead silent study, her originally tightly furrowed brow actually smoothed out miraculously. Jiang Wanning leaned against the wide back of her chair, her whole body presenting an unprecedentedly relaxed posture. She wasn't actually listening to the content. Those data points were things she already knew inside out. She was listening to the voice. That voice was like a stream of cool spring water, slowly flowed across her hot, parched eardrums, becoming the best white noise in the world. The sharp ringing inside her head vanished, and that violent impulse to destroy everything was also smoothed out. I don't know how much time had passed. My throat was burning dry from reading. Seeing that the woman remained motionless with her eyes closed, I thought she had fallen asleep. I tentatively stopped and called out softly, "Miss Jiang." The very moment the sound stopped, Jiang Wanning's closed phoenix eyes snapped open. There was not a single shred of sleepiness in them, only the displeasure of being interrupted. "Why did you stop? Keep going." I'm thirsty." Jiang Wanning stared at me for a second, then suddenly reached out her hand and pushed the untouched cup of warm water by her side, right in front of me. "Drink it." "Is it for me to drink?" Jiang Wanning arched an eyebrow, her tone dangerous and full of disdain. No. How could I dare show disdain? I quickly picked up that expensive crystal cup and began taking small sips like a little hamster. Jiang Wanning watched me drink water, looking at my puffed-up cheeks. Her fingers lightly tapped on the armrest, her mood inexplicably pleasant. Seeing me put down the cup, Jiang Wanning closed her eyes again and parted her red lips. "Since you're done drinking, continue. Read that expansion proposal for the overseas market as well." Looking at that thick, all-English proposal document, I wanted to cry but had no tears. After reading English financial reports consecutively for 2 hours, I felt like smoke was about to come out of my throat. Even though I had a cup of water in between, the dryness from overusing my vocal cords still made me want to cough uncontrollably. But I didn't dare to cough, terrified that a single cough would trigger her sensitive nerves once again. Finally, I finished reading. I closed the document folder, my voice already carrying a sliver of obvious hoarseness and fatigue. Jiang Wanning leaned back against her chair. After listening to bedtime stories for 2 hours, the sharp buzzing sound inside her head had indeed faded significantly. She showed mercy and opened her mouth. "Fine, take a break." Saying that, she casually picked up a fountain pen, preparing to sign documents. Feeling as if I had received a grand amnesty, I let out a long sigh of relief. But I didn't dare leave. Sitting here waiting blindly was pure torture, and it was easy for my mind to wander. My gaze wavered and landed on the cloth bag by my feet. Inside were all the tools I used to make a living. Since her mood was relatively stable right now, I might as well do something useful. Plucking up my courage, I carefully pulled out a green jade medicine, mortar, and a small medicine pestle from the cloth bag. Then I produced a few sealed paper packets. Inside were the calming herbs I had blended beforehand. For this specially made storax incense, the freshly ground aroma had the best effect. If I could make the scent in this study a bit More intense? Perhaps she wouldn't lose her temper so easily. I poured the herbs into the medicine mortar, held the medicine pestle, and tentatively ground them lightly. A dull, thudding sound echoed in the quiet study. My heart tightened violently, and my movements froze instantly. I instinctively held my breath, looking up in terror at the woman behind the desk. Sure enough, Jiang Waning's hand that was signing documents stopped. The tip of her pen smudged a small blot of ink on the paper. The air in the study seemed to freeze instantly. My hand holding the medicine pestle was covered in cold sweat. I was already imagining the scene of bodyguards rushing in, throwing me out along with my medicine mortar. I'm sorry. I'll put it away right. Just as I was about to pack up the medicine, Jiang Waning interrupted me. What is that sound? She did not lift her head, only turning her face slightly. Her brow furrowed a bit, as if distinguishing something carefully. I swallowed a mouthful of saliva and confessed honestly, it's grinding medicine. I am grinding calming incense. Jiang Waning finally lifted her head, those cold eyes. You! Landing on the green jade medicine mortar in my arms. She immediately withdrew her gaze and looked down at her documents again. Continue. I froze for a moment. Jiang Waning let out an impatient click of her tongue. I told you to continue. Can't you understand human speech? How could I dare ask any further questions? I quickly gripped the medicine pestle tightly and ground down carefully once again. At first, my movements were very restrained, terrified of using too much force. But as the medicine pestle fell time after time, that dull and rhythmic sound began to echo through the study. Gradually, the herbs were crushed and ground open, and a delicate, slightly bitter, yet sweet aftertaste herbal fragrance slowly diffused along with my movements. Jiang Waning felt her eyelids begin to grow heavy. That long-lost natural drowsiness wrapped around her gently like a tide. Before anyone noticed, the sunlight outside the window filtered sideways through the sheer curtain, casting dappled light and shadows onto the carpet. The study presented an extremely bizarre, yet harmonious scene. That eldest miss of the capital circle, who held life and death power over a multi-billion commercial empire, was leaning back against her executive chair. The fountain pen in her hand had slid off at some point. Her eyes were half closed, and her breathing became long, slow, and deep. Meanwhile, not far from her feet, I was sitting on the small stool, holding a green jade mortar in my arms, grinding the medicine extremely seriously, stroke by stroke, like an industrious little rabbit. The quiet peace of the moment was unbelievable. Until half an hour later, my hand felt sore. I secretly stopped, wanting to shake out my hand. The moment the sound stopped, the woman in the chair immediately let out a displeased hum for her nose. Her brow furrowed instinctively. Don't stop. Grind a bit longer. Looking at this woman, who treated me as a human white noise machine, I pouted my lips in grievance. Resigned to my fate, I could only grip the medicine pestle. Once again beside these contracts, worth billions, continuing to act as her medicine-grinding boy with a bitter face. But very soon, I realized the atmosphere was turning strange. Jiang Waning, who had originally calmed down, seemed to show signs of her frantic mood, clawing its way back. The fountain pen in her hand spun around her fingertips, then slapped heavily onto the desk again. Not enough. It's still not enough. Jiang Waning felt that the beast inside her bones, called skin hunger, was waking up, although the sound by her ear helped her sleep, and the herbal scent at her nose calmed her mind. She always felt that something was missing. That sense of emptiness was gnawing at her blood vessels like ants, making her fingers itch, desperately wanting to grasp onto something real and tangible. She lifted her head, her gaze landing on me as I shrank back in the corner. Stop. I startled, my hand-grinding medicine halting abruptly. I lifted my head blankly. What's wrong? Was my sound too loud and disturbed you? Jiang Waning tossed aside her pen, leaning her body back, her gaze staring straight at me. Too far away. I can't hear it. I glanced at the 3-meter distance between us, then looked at this study that was so quiet. You could hear a pin drop. Can't hear it? This was Jiang Waning, who possessed godlike ears, and could even hear a maid next door clink a cup while pouring water. I attempted to reason with her. Miss Jiang, at this distance, bring it over and sit here. Jiang Waning didn't listen to my explanation at all. That spot was right beside her executive chair. In my heart, I was 10,000 times unwilling. That was a high-risk zone, like keeping company with a tiger. But, under the pressure of Jiang Waning's gradually freezing gaze, I could only admit defeat. Cradling the green jade medicine mortar, I picked up the small round stool and shuffled over like a snail. Jiang Wanning seemed very satisfied with this distance, the furrow between her brows easing a bit. Continue right here. I had no choice but to sit down again, biting the bullet to continue grinding medicine, wishing my body could curl into a ball, to minimize my presence as much as possible. Jiang Wanning picked up her documents again, but this time she didn't spin her pen. That free left hand of hers naturally dropped down. I was concentrating intently on the medicine mortar, when suddenly I felt my scalp tingle. A slightly cool hand landed on top of my head without any warning, just as I was about to cry out in surprise. Jiang Wanning didn't even look up, her gaze remaining fixed on the contract in her hands. Don't move, there's a white hair. Before I could even talk back, that hand had already slid down from the top of my head, weaving into my pitch-black hair. My entire body went as rigid as a stone. I could feel that the hand had no intention of stopping. After playing with my hair enough, those slightly cool fingertips brushed past my earlobe half-intentionally. My ears were extremely sensitive, and they instantly turned as red as if they were on fire. Jiang Wanning finally pulled a sliver of her gaze away from the documents. Why are your ears so red? She became even more forward, the pad of her index finger gently pinching my burning earlobe, kneading it with a moderate amount of pressure. I couldn't help but try to dodge away, but she used a little bit of force to hold me down. Focus on your work. The grinding rhythm is messed up. The rims of my eyes turned red from the grievance. Miss Jiang? I bit my lip. Jiang Wanning was completely unmoved. Endure it. Who told you to be my medicine? The atmosphere in the study was bizarre and quiet. Jiang Wanning seemed to really enjoy this wicked pleasure of working, while petting her cat at the same time. Her left hand flipped through the documents, but her right hand never once left my nape and earlobe, as if playing with a handy stress relief toy. I knelt on the carpet, my legs completely numb, yet I was angry but didn't dare to speak up. Right at this moment, the tablet computer on the desk suddenly vibrated, shattering this tranquility. It was an encrypted transnational video conference request. Jiang Wanning glanced at the caller ID on the screen, and had no intention of making me excuse myself. She simply withdrew her troublemaking hand lazily, and pressed the answer button, but she didn't let me stand up. Instead, she used the tip of her foot to lightly kick my shin, signaling that I wasn't allowed to stop. I could only try my best to hide in the camera's blind spot. The video connected, and on the other side of the screen, several faces sitting upright and formal instantly appeared. President Zhang, Sister Wanning, even across the screen. I could feel the tension radiating from that side. It was said that during the last video conference, because someone had the background noise of a construction drill over there, Jiang Wanning had smashed the tablet right then and there, and directly stripped that manager of his position. So this time, everyone was in an absolutely silent, soundproof room, not even daring to breathe too loudly. Jiang Wanning leaned back against her chair, her expression cold. Get to the point. The meeting began, and the executives started taking turns reporting the quarterly financial results, reporting every single data point with absolute caution. The study was very quiet, with only the occasional sound of turning pages and, from beneath the desk, that extremely faint, dull sound of grinding medicine. Because it had gone through special microphone noise reduction, and Jiang Wanning was deliberately blocking the source of the sound, the people on the other side of the video did not hear this strange background noise, until I really got too tired from that posture and wanted to secretly switch positions. But the moment I moved, my arm accidentally hit the desk leg. The medicine pestle in my hand instantly spun out of control, the hard green jade pestle, clinking heavily against the rim of the medicine mortar, then rolling off onto the floor, and colliding against the base of the marble desk leg. This string of crisp and sharp clangs traveled over to the other side of the video, sounding practically like a sudden clap of thunder. The video conference instantly fell dead silent. The faces of several executives on the other side of the screen turned white with fear. The reporting voice ground to a sudden halt. Everyone held their breath, staring fixedly at Jiang Wanning on the screen, waiting for that impending storm of thunderous wrath. Inside the study, I was also completely frozen with fear. I frantically picked up the medicine pestle, looking up in terror at the woman above me. I'm sorry. Jiang Wanning's gaze sure enough grew cold. She shifted her gaze away from the screen, and slowly lowered her head to look at me. Right when the people on the other side of the video Thought she was about to explode, and right when I thought I was about to be thrown out to feed the wolves, that woman, who usually had zero tolerance for noise, only furrowed her brows slightly. Then she actually reached her hand beneath the desk, right in this absolute blind spot of the camera, and gently caught my hand, which was icy cold from the fright. Her finger pads rested on my somewhat reddened knuckles, rubbing them. Be gentler. Doesn't your hand hurt? On the other side of the video, everyone turned to stone. The executives looked at each other, doubting whether they were experiencing auditory hallucinations. A few wealthy young heirs of the capital circle, who understood a bit about romance, instantly had extremely colorful expressions in their eyes, carrying even a trace of unspeakable shock. That vice president stammered as he spoke. President Jiang, should we excuse ourselves for a moment? Jiang Wanning lifted her head, her gaze returning to the screen. At that instant, the gentleness on her face vanished without a trace, turning back into that ice-cold, deadpan face. Excuse yourselves for what? One of her hands was still beneath the desk, carelessly squeezing and playing with my fingers, while her other hand tapped the desktop. Continue reporting the data from just now. If you get another decimal point wrong, go to HR yourself to collect your resignation letter. Yes. The meeting continued, but everyone's mental state had completely collapsed. While trembling as they reported their work, everyone couldn't help but use their peripheral vision to glance at the blind spot at the bottom of the screen. Meanwhile, beneath the desk, my face had already turned completely red. Because Jiang Wanning did not let go of my hand, she just sat there expressionlessly, listening to a report on a multi-billion-dollar project, while wickedly squeezing my finger joints, one by one beneath the table. At dinner time, although the atmosphere in the dining room was still quiet, it was visibly much more relaxed than that execution ground at lunch. The servants still stood with their hands down in attendance, not daring to breathe loudly, but a trace of unhideable astonishment was added to their eyes. Because Jiang Wanning seemed to be in a good mood tonight, she had changed into a lotus-pink loungewear set, and was sipping her soup unhurriedly. The cold aura that perennially shrouded her brow seemed to have been temporarily washed clean by those 2 hours of medicine grinding in the afternoon. Sitting across from her, I was sitting on pins and needles. I didn't know what happened to the video conference afterward. I only remembered that when that vice president hung up the video, his expression looked like he was crying, yet also like he was laughing. A cold voice suddenly broke the silence. Eat more. I was currently holding a bowl of plain rice. Hearing these words, I jerked my head up, and saw Jiang Wanning holding the serving chopsticks, very naturally placing a piece of brightly colored sweet and sour spare rib into my bone-white porcelain bowl. The surrounding air seemed to freeze for a split second. Standing to the side, the old butler's eyelids twitched violently. Jiang Wanning put down the serving chopsticks, her gaze landing on my stunned face, her brow arching slightly. Why are you looking at me? Don't want to eat? I snapped out of it, looking at that rib in my bowl. My mood is complicated, as if I were looking at a piece of meat in a last meal before execution. Thank you, Miss John. After saying that, I picked up the rib and took a bite. It was perfectly sweet and sour, and the meat was tender and thoroughly cooked. Jiang Wanning looked at me in a quite good mood. Since you like grinding medicine, all my calming incense will be made by you from now on. I had just swallowed, and hearing this, I nodded instinctively. Okay. The manor has a dedicated incense-making room. There's a grinder inside, so it's pretty convenient. You are not allowed to use machines. Jiang Wanning interrupted me coldly. Things made by machines have no soul. She leaned her body back, her fingers lightly rubbing the jade Buddhist beads on her wrist, as she said something extremely dominant and unreasonable. I want you to make it by hand. Use that green jade jar to crush it bit by bit. My eyes went wide, and I looked at her in disbelief. The monthly consumption of calming incense at Jiang Manor was huge. If it all had to be crushed entirely by hand, what would become of my hands? I attempted to protest, but Miss Jiang, that's very inefficient, and it's very tiring. The amusement in the depths of Jiang Wanning's eyes faded a bit, her voice carrying a dangerous sense of oppression. What, do you think you came here to enjoy yourself? Gu Yanqin, don't forget your identity. You're here to pay off a debt. I instantly deflated like a punctured balloon. Understood, I said, lowering my head and poking at the rice in my bowl. However, what I didn't know was that Jiang Wanning didn't care about efficiency at all, nor did she care about any soul. She was simply obsessed with that sound, obsessed with the way I sat by her side, grinding herbs tirelessly for her. I originally thought this was already the limit. But when night fell, I discovered that this lunatic's bizarre fetishes went far beyond this. At 10:30 p.m., having finished my shower, I was just preparing to go to sleep in my own room, when the bedroom door was suddenly knocked on. "Mr. Gu, the miss requests your presence." With an anxious heart, cradling my tool of the trade, that green jade medicine jar, I pushed open the door to the master bedroom next door. Jiang Wanning was already in bed. She was wearing a black camisole dress and leaning against the headboard, holding a book in her hand. She patted the spot on the carpet next to the bed. "Come here." Cradling the medicine jar, I walked over and looked at her warily. "Miss Jiang, is it so late that you still want me to read?" Jiang Wanning closed the book and set it on the nightstand, then pointed at the jar in my arms. "No reading. Grind medicine." I glanced at the wall clock. It was 10:30 p.m. "Aren't you going to sleep now?" Jiang Wanning slid into the blanket, adjusting herself into a comfortable position to lie down, her hands folded over her stomach. She closed her eyes and said matter-of-factly, "Precisely because I need to sleep. I want to fall asleep listening to that sound. That sound helps me sleep." Cradling the medicine jar, I stood beside the bed, completely dumbfounded, using the sound of grinding medicine as a lullaby. What kind of bizarre, twisted habit was this? Jiang Wanning didn't hear any movement and opened her eyes displeased. "What are you dazing off for? Begin. Do not stop until I call it off." I took a deep breath, resigned to my fate, and sat down on the carpet by the bed, placing the medicine jar on my knees. The dull, monotonous thudding sound echoed in the quiet bedroom. The fragrance of the herbs slowly diffused, blending with the crisp, cold scent that was already on Jiang Wanning's bed, interweaving into a peculiar aroma. Jiang Wanning kept her eyes closed, her breathing gradually becoming steady. To me, this was dull, tedious, hard labor. With every grind, my wrist ached a little more. But to Jiang Wanning's senses, this was a top-tier indulgence. Half an hour passed. My hand felt like it was about to break, and my eyelids began to fight each other. I sneaked a look at the person on the bed. Jiang Wanning's breathing was slow and steady. She seemed to have fallen fast asleep. That face, which was usually sharp and cold, currently, under the dim light, looked exceptionally peaceful and harmless, and her eyelashes were so long it made one envious. I muttered softly, "You're asleep, right?" My movements slowly came to a halt, wanting to take the opportunity to slip back and sleep. However, less than 3 seconds after the sound stopped, the woman on the bed, who had been fast asleep, suddenly moved. One hand grabbed my wrist that was resting by the bedside. I was so startled I almost screamed. Trying to slack off, Jiang Wanning didn't open her eyes, her voice laced with heavy sleepiness. Yet it remained incredibly dominant. She didn't let go of her hand, but took advantage of the momentum to pull my wrist, right next to her pillow. Her cheek nuzzled against the back of my hand. "Don't stop. Continue." She even pulled the blanket upward a bit, pressing one of my hands beneath the blanket as well, as if that were her lock to prevent a toy from escaping. I was forced to lean against the edge of the bed, one hand pressed down by her, while my other hand still had to laboriously hold the medicine pestle, looking at this woman who treated me as a human sleep aid, plus a hand warmer. I wanted to cry, but had no tears. The pitiful sound of grinding medicine echoed once again in the deep of the night on the 3rd floor of Zhang Manor, accompanied by my helpless sighs, continuing all the way into the late hours of the night. Several consecutive days of forced reading accompaniment and late-night medicine grinding made the atmosphere on the 3rd floor of Zhang Manor turn into a somewhat eerily harmonious state. The servants were surprised to discover that the moody eldest Mrs. frequency of throwing tantrums had plummeted recently, and I, as the contributor behind all this, saw my treatment in Zhang Manor rise visibly like a boat on rising waters. The kitchen would specifically make my favorite Jiangnan desserts. The butler would respectfully bow when he saw me, and even Jiang Wanning herself would occasionally, when in a good mood, allow me to read leisure books in the study, instead of reading financial reports like a broken recorder. This illusion of quiet peace caused my tense nerves to slowly relax, and I even developed a sliver of uncalled-for wishful thinking. Afternoon, in the study, Jiang Wanning was sitting behind her large office desk, handling official business. I sat on the sofa to the side, holding a cup of freshly brewed hot tea in my hands, but my gaze involuntarily drifted toward that woman. These past few days, Jiang Wanning's tolerance for me had been ridiculously high. Even if I occasionally walked a bit heavily, or turned a page a bit too loudly. She would only cast a faint glance over, without losing her temper. This caused a dangerous thought to emerge in my mind. Where exactly lay her bottom line regarding me? Was it because my voice and scent were truly irreplaceable? Or was it that, just as she had shown that night when she burned the IOU, she really treated me as a person, just a little bit differently? If it were the former, I was merely a tool. If it were the latter, I might have a bargaining chip to negotiate terms. I lowered my eyes, looking at the heavy glass cup in my hand. Let's give it a try. Let's take a gamble. I stood up, holding the cup, and walked to the office desk. Ms. Jiang, your water has gone cold. Let me change it for a fresh cup. She didn't lift her head, only letting out a casual, while continuing to sign documents. I picked up the cup by her side, and walked to the water dispenser to fill it. The sound of the flowing water was very light. Everything was as normal. After filling the cup, I walked back to the desk. Right at the exact split second, I set the cup down. My fingers loosened ever so slightly. The heavy glass bottom slammed hard against the solid dark walnut desk surface. A few drops of water even splashed out from the cup, landing right on the document Jiang Wanning had just signed. Time seemed to freeze at this very second. My heart instantly leaped into my throat. My fingers tightly clutched the corner of my shirt, and I held my breath, observing the woman's reaction. 1 second, 2 seconds. Jiang Wanning slowly lifted her head. Inside those cold phoenix eyes, there was no explosive rage like I had predicted, nor was there the indulgence I had hoped for. There was only a sheet of piercingly cold clarity that saw through everything. That look was too sharp. A chill ran down my spine, and a terror of being locked onto by a wild beast instantly crept over my entire body. Jiang Wanning put down her pen, leaning her body back against the chair. Your hand slipped? I swallowed a mouthful of saliva, biting the bullet to swallow the lie down. I'm sorry. I didn't hold it firmly. Jiang Wanning let out a light laugh. That smile did not reach her eyes, and its chilling meaning sent a shudder through one's core. Is that so, Gu Yanqin? Do you think I've been treating you too well lately? My entire body went rigid, and I instinctively wanted to take a step back. Ms. Jiang, I didn't mean to. Eat him here. 2 brief words interrupted my pale explanation. I didn't want to go over. My feet felt rooted to the ground. Jiang Wanning narrowed her eyes, her patience running out. She suddenly reached out and grabbed my wrist in a tight grip. My whole body stumbled forward, and in the next second, the world spun around. I was pulled directly into her arms by her. The distance between us instantly vanished to 0. Miss Jiang, what are you doing? Jiang Wanning raised her other hand, her index finger gently pressing against my lips. Shh, she lowered her head, her nose almost touching mine. Gu Yanqin, drop your little schemes. What are you trying to test? Testing whether I'd be willing to hurt you, or testing whether you can turn this cage upside down? I didn't. You did. You let go of that cup on purpose just now. You wanted to see what I would do to you over a little noise. The shame and terror of being seen through made my body tremble uncontrollably. A violent pleasure flashed in the depths of Jiang Wanning's eyes. She suddenly leaned close to my ear. Gu Yanqin, you must remember, I dote on you and let you walk freely in this forbidden zone, because you are well behaved, and because you are my medicine. But that doesn't mean you can use my favor to be arrogant and walk all over me. This is the first and final warning. Don't let it happen again. Jiang Wanning's tone suddenly turned freezing cold, carrying a grim undertone. If there is a next time, and I catch you intentionally making noise again, to test my boundaries, there is an absolute soundproof room in the basement of Jiang Manor. There is no light there, no sound, and even the air is dead. I will lock you inside. There. Even if you scream until your throat rips open, not a single sound will be heard outside. When that time comes, you will truly never be able to make a sound for the rest of your life. My face instantly turned as pale as paper. Seeing the rims of my eyes turn red, Jiang Wanning's inner hostility actually dissipated a little. As long as you behave yourself and act as my medicine, that kind of place will never belong to you. Do you understand? I understand. Jiang Wanning curled her lips in satisfaction. She lowered her head and, onto my tear-rimmed eyes, dropped a kiss as light as a feather. Good boy. Since you understand, wipe the table clean. And, she pointed at the document smudged by the water, read it to me all over again. I frantically wiped the water stains off the desk, my hands still shaking uncontrollably. At this moment, I was completely awake. What quiet peace? What gentle intimacy? It was all an illusion. A vicious dog is a vicious dog after all. Even if it occasionally wags its tail, it cannot change its nature to devour people. It was the third day after the warning incident. I clearly felt a change in the atmosphere of Zhang Manor, or to be more precise, it was the way everyone treated me. That had undergone a earth-shattering change. Before, the servants looked at me with pity. But now, that look had turned into awe, even carrying a hint of ingratiation. Mr. Gu, this is osmanthus sugar lotus root freshly made by the kitchen. The miss instructed that you like sweet food, so they used fresh osmanthus shipped from Jiangnan. Mr. Gu, your herbs are done drying. Do you need help storing them in the jars? I walked down the stairs, and every servant I met along the way respectfully bowed and greeted me, wishing they could put me on a pedestal. There was no other reason. Everyone had discovered an iron law for survival over these past few days. As long as I was around, that moody king of hell was like a tiger with its teeth pulled, and the safety coefficient rose vertically. I was the only fire extinguisher in Zhang Manor, and also the life-saving amulet for the entire household. At 10:00 a.m., I was sitting on the sofa in the living room flipping through a medical book, when the old butler walked over with an anxious face. Mr. Gu, could you please go to the study for a moment? I closed the book and looked at him warily. What's wrong? The butler wiped his sweat, glancing upstairs with lingering fear. The head of the South City branch came, and he poked a huge hole in things, causing a bad debt of 300 million. The miss lost her temper fiercely. She already smashed a set of teaware just now. That manager is kneeling inside, and he's probably about to be carried out. I pursed my lips. That's Ms. Zhang's official business. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to go in, right? The butler, who was usually serious and always had a stiff face, now bowed deeply to me. Mr. Gu, consider this me begging you. Besides the manager, there are several group executives inside. If the miss really gets physical, it will be very hard to clean up the situation. Right now, only if you go in, even if just to bring a cup of tea. The miss's anger can be cut in half. I looked at the butler's gray hair, then listened to the faint sounds of furious shouting coming from upstairs, and finally let out a helpless sigh. After all, I understand. I stood up, went to the kitchen, and carried a cup of freshly brewed ginseng tea. The study door wasn't closed tightly. Just as I reached the entrance, I heard a fierce, cold sneer coming from inside. 300 million. If you threw it into the sea, you'd at least hear a splash. You used it to gamble? I think you must be tired of living. Accompanied by the sharp shatter of porcelain, the middle-aged man kneeling on the floor was already shaking like chaff. His forehead was pressed against the shards of porcelain, blood flowing freely. Yet he didn't even dare to speak his pleas for mercy clearly. The atmospheric pressure inside the room was low to the extreme, and the few executives standing didn't even dare to breathe too loudly. Amidst this suffocating dead silence, 2 extremely soft knocks on the door rang out. Everyone flinched in surprise. However, sitting in her executive chair, Zhang Wanning, who was filled entirely with hostility, had a slight twitch of her brow upon hearing this sound. She swept a cold gaze toward the doorway. I carried the tray and walked inside, heading straight to the office desk, and gently placed that cup of ginseng tea by her side. Ms. Zhang, have a cup of tea to calm your anger. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the eldest miss to explode. However, a miracle happened. Zhang Wanning's tightly tensed jawline, the moment she caught that familiar scent on my body, relaxed visibly. Throw him out. Follow the rules. Break one hand and send him to the police station. The man on the ground felt as if he had received a grand amnesty. Even though his hand would be broken, at least his life was saved. Thank you, President Zhang. Thank you, President Zhang. The bodyguards quickly entered the scene to clean up, and the executives also receded like a tide, none of them able to resist stealing a glance at me before they left. Their eyes filled completely with gratitude toward a savior, a living bodhisattva. The study quickly restored its quietness. Jiang Wanning took a sip of tea. She reached out her hand, habitually squeezing my fingers that hung by my side. The butler asked you to come? I figured you might be thirsty. Jiang Wanning let out a light chuckle, not exposing my little cleverness. She put down her teacup and stood up, straightening her slightly messy hair. Fine, don't just stand here. Go change your clothes. I need to go out for a bit. Jiang Wanning walked to the vanity, picked up a pair of pearl studs, but didn't put them on herself. Instead, through the mirror, she looked with a cold gaze at me standing behind her. She turned around, her chin slightly lifted, revealing the cold white lines of her neck. That posture was noble and matter-of-fact. What are you dazing off for? Come over and put the studs on for me. My fingertips trembled slightly, but seeing the woman's indisputable gaze, I could only walk over. We stood extremely close. I could smell the familiar cold scent on her body. I could feel her warm breath, while Jiang Wanning lifted her eyes, or gaze, landing on my focused features without any concealment. Her hand hovered loosely around the side of my waist. All done. I finished putting on the studs and just wanted to take a step back to widen the distance. But Jiang Wanning clutched my waist, not letting me move. Go upstairs and grab a jacket. After saying that, she released her grip, turned around to grab her coat from the hanger, and left behind. A sentence that made my heart stop. Come with me. Where to? Taking you to a gathering. Jiang Wanning stood in the light and shadow of the entryway, turning the Buddhist beads on her wrist. You've been hidden away for so long. If those people outside still don't show some discernment, they're going to wear down the threshold of Zhang Manor trying to look inside. At 8:30 p.m., the night was as dark as ink. A red Ferrari slowly drove into capital city's most secretive and top-tier private club, the Orchid Pavilion. After the car came to a steady stop, a bodyguard respectfully pulled open the car door. Jiang Wanning stepped out of the car, but she didn't walk away immediately. Instead, she stood by the car door and turned her body slightly. Immediately after, I crawled out of the vehicle. Jiang Wanning looked at my shoulders, which had flinched a little. Cold? Not cold. It's just that I'm a bit scared. The atmosphere here is too oppressive. The surroundings were filled entirely with black-clad bodyguards, and the servers standing at the entrance all kept their heads lowered, not daring to look directly ahead. An unspeakable sense of severity permeated the air. What is there to fear? With me here, no one in this capital city dares to touch you. After saying that, she hooked her arm through mine and walked straight toward the main door, passing through the winding corridors. The surrounding environment grew deeper and quieter. Several servers wearing traditional Tang suits saw Jiang Wanning and immediately bent over in a 90-degree bow. When had I ever seen such a display? I was socially anxious by nature, and the sense of oppression brought by this top-tier Vanity Fair, where I had never set foot before, made me instinctively feel uneasy. Jiang Wanning by my side became my only reliance. Jiang Wanning turned her body, looking at me with a half-smile. Give me your hand. As she spoke, she directly held out that left hand wearing the Buddhist beads. I froze for a moment, and before I could even react, she impatiently flipped her hand and grabbed me in a direct grip, clasping my warm, large hand just like that. My heart pounded wildly. Ms. Jiang Wanning looked straight ahead, pulling me along as she continued walking forward. Keep close. There are many mazes in here. If you get lost, I'm not looking for you. Jiang Wanning's fingers were like iron pincers, tightly locking onto my pulse. With that kind of strength, it wasn't that she was afraid I'd get lost. She was clearly afraid I would run away. In the deepest part of the Orchid Pavilion, inside the sky-class private room, the heavy, carved wooden door was tightly shut. The sound of talking and laughing could faintly be heard coming from inside. The bodyguards at the door saw Jiang Wanning and immediately opened the large door respectfully. Ms. Jiang has arrived. Along with this announcement, the originally rowdy private room instantly fell silent. Led by Jiang Wanning, I stepped across that high threshold with one stride. The private room was thick with smoke, and 7 or 8 glamorously dressed young women were sitting inside. When everyone's gaze projected over in unison, the expressions of everyone froze. That Jiang Wanning, who never approached men, and reportedly had severe mysophobia and a deep-seated aversion to men, was actually holding a man's hand. A woman wearing a cheongsam, who sat in the main seat, was the first to react, her mocking gaze sweeping across our tightly clasped hands. Oh? The sun must have risen from the west, Wanning. Which family does this handsome little guy belong to? How come I haven't seen him before? Jiang Wanning completely ignored everyone's scrutiny. She led me directly to the very center of the sofa. She pressed down on my shoulders to make me sit by her side, and only then did she sit down lazily. This is the one who cures my headaches. The woman in the cheongsam leaned over and lowered her voice. Looks pretty young. Still a student, right? Being stared at with a look meant for evaluating merchandise made my entire body feel uncomfortable, and I instinctively shrunk back a bit behind Jiang Wanning. This shift happened to bump right into Jiang Wanning's arm. Jiang Wanning lifted her eyes, sweeping a cold glance at the one in the cheongsam. What are you looking at? Do you want to lose your eyes? The one in the Cheongsam rubbed her nose in embarrassment. Fine. I won't look. Is that all right? You're protecting him like he's your own eyeball. Jiang Wanning ignored her, only turning her head to look at me as I shrunk behind her like a quail. She stretched out her hand, her fingertips brushing past my burning earlobe, intentionally or otherwise. Sit nicely. Don't run around, and don't look around. If you get snatched away by this pack of tigresses, I will be very angry. The lights in the private room were dim, and the air was filled with a mixed odor of expensive perfume and alcohol. The combined smell caused Jiang Wanning to furrow her brows imperceptibly. She had always loathed this kind of foul environment. If it weren't for the development rights of that piece of land in the south of the city, she wouldn't have stepped foot into this gathering at all. I sat quietly by her side, trying my best to minimize my sense of presence. Sitting opposite us was the key figure of this cooperation, the CEO of the Su Group, Su Manjing. After downing a few glasses of wine, those eyes of hers began to drift around restlessly. Aiming, I heard you've been working on your temper at Jiang Manor lately, and you rarely even go to the company. Working on my temper doesn't quite cover it. I've just been recuperating from an illness. Su Manjing smiled slightly, her gaze bypassing Jiang Wanning and gluing itself nakedly onto my body. Recuperating from an illness? I think it's more like you're keeping a handsome guy around. Feeling that gaze, my stomach churned, and I instinctively shuffled closer toward Jiang Wanning's side. With this movement, my arm lightly brushed against Jiang Wanning's arm. Jiang Wanning's movements paused slightly, and she didn't push me away. Instead, she took advantage of the momentum to raise her arm, loosely resting it on the back of the sofa behind me. This was a deeply possessive and protective gesture. Jiang Wanning lifted her eyelids, her voice turning several degrees colder. CEO Su, let's talk business. Su Manjing had clearly drunk too much, and failed to catch the warning in Jiang Wanning's tone. Holding her wine glass, she stood up wobbly, grabbed a clean goblet, and poured a full glass of red wine. Business is to be talked, but wine is also to be drunk. Come, little brother. Su Manjing held the wine glass and bypassed the coffee table, thrusting it straight in front of my face. Since it's our first time meeting, your big sister here toasts you a glass. Looking at your outfit, you must still be in school, right? College students these days are really fresh. Following a busy person like Miss Jiang, you must feel very lonely, right? Come, drink this glass of wine and consider us acquainted. I looked at the sloshing red liquid before me and smelled that pungent scent of alcohol, my stomach churning violently. I don't know how to drink, and I'm allergic to alcohol. I shrank backward, wanting to decline and apologize. Su Manjing's face grew cold, and riding on the alcohol, her hand reached out to grab my wrist. Hey, not giving me face? For someone brought here by Miss Jiang to put on such big airs. What's wrong with taking a sip? It's not like I drugged it. Seeing that hand about to touch me, a slender, pale hand shot out across the air, blocking steadily right in front of me. The back of Jiang Wanning's hand pressed against that wine glass. He doesn't drink. Su Manjing froze for a second, and then the alcohol rushed to her head, making her even more displeased. Wanning, this makes things boring. Everyone comes out to play just to have a good time. You might be the eldest miss of the capital circle, but is your gigolo really that precious, that he couldn't even drink a single glass of wine? The moment these words came out, the air in the private room instantly froze. Several wealthy women nearby who had been watching the show had major changes in their expressions, one after another, shooting looks at Su Manjing. But she didn't see them at all. My face went pale. Although I knew my identity was just that of a debt compensation product, having it called out like this in public, the sense of shame still slapped my face like a blow. Jiang Wanning felt my trembling. Her left hand resting on her knee suddenly tightened. This piece of land was crucial to the Jiang family, and besides, Gu Yanqin was far too timid. If she took action right now, that bloody scene would definitely give him nightmares. Jiang Wanning suppressed the raging hostility in her eyes, patiently explaining, he is allergic to alcohol. CEO Su, regarding the contract. Su Manjing felt that her face had been slighted, turning her embarrassment into raw fury. She suddenly raised the wine glass in her hand and slammed it heavily down on the marble coffee table. What allergy? It's just an excuse. The bottom of the glass collided violently with the hard marble, letting out a sharp, ear-piercing crash. Wine splashed everywhere, spilling across the table, resembling a pool of glaring blood. This sound was far too loud, and for Jiang Wanning, This loud crash was like a rusty saw, viciously sawing through her skull, stabbing directly into her most vulnerable auditory nerve. The line of defense for her sanity, which she had barely maintained just now, fractured completely at this very second. Jiang Wanning's face instantly turned deathly pale. She gripped the wineglass in her hand with a deathlock. She was enduring. She was using an immense amount of willpower to suppress the urge to grab a wine bottle and split the head of this idiot before her wide open. Su Manjing was still shouting loudly, "Wanning, you absolutely must drink this wine today. Not drinking it means you look down on me." It was all noise. Jiang Wanning closed her eyes, cold sweat sliding down her temples. I, who had been sitting by her side the entire time, sensed that something was wrong. "Miss Jiang," I saw her deathly pale face, and the agony leaking out from her tightly closed eyes. The air in the private room felt as if it had been filled with lead, heavy enough to suffocate someone. Su Manjing was still shouting loudly under the influence of alcohol, the sound of her wineglass striking the table coming one after another, sounding like a death knell for the impending disaster. The people around were all watching the show. No one noticed the abnormality in the corner. Only I noticed, as I was closest to Jiang Wanning, close enough to clearly perceive the magnetic field surrounding her body. As a practitioner of traditional Chinese medicine, observation, listening, questioning, and pulse checking were instincts carved into my bones. I didn't even look at that fat woman throwing an alcoholic tantrum. My gaze locked tightly onto Jiang Wanning's face. Jiang Wanning's breathing frequency changed. The pupils of those phoenix eyes were currently contracting violently, finally narrowing into a tiny, pinpoint-like black dot. In the whites of her eyes, red blood vessels spread outward at a speed visible to the naked eye. This was a symptom of an overexcited sympathetic nervous system, and the prelude to her severe mania losing control and exploding. I was far too familiar with this state. On that stormy night, she had this exact look right before she choked my neck. At this very moment, murderous intent was on a hair trigger. Right at this critical juncture, a tiny touch suddenly came from beneath the table. Jiang Wanning's entire body froze, her hand hanging at her side. Without anyone noticing, I had quietly reached over. I didn't hold her hand, but simply extended my slender pinky finger, gently and tentatively hooking it around Jiang Wanning's pinky. Then, moving my fingertips slightly, at the edge of her sweating, scalding palm, I scratched it softly. Once, and then again. This slight, tickling sensation, however, was like a weak yet steady electric current, instantly piercing through Jiang Wanning's sensory defense line that had been locked down by the noise. The soothing feeling followed the lines of her palm, climbing all the way up her wrist with a tingling sensation, creeping up her spine, and finally entering her brain, which was on the verge of exploding. Jiang Wanning's sharp red alarm sounds inside her mind actually ground to a halt for a split second. Because of this touch that felt like a kitten scratching her palm, she slowly lowered her head, shifting her gaze away from her murderous target, and landing it on me by her side. I didn't make a sound, only silently mouthing the words, "Miss Jiang, don't be angry." Beneath the table, my pinky finger hooked her finger once more, carrying a clumsy attempt to please and plead. Jiang Wanning's tightly tensed jawline finally loosened a fraction. That terrifying pinpoint shape in her pupils slowly dissipated, and her breathing became heavy once again. She didn't speak, only turning her hand over. That hand, which had originally been prepared to smash someone, released the wineglass, and, beneath the table, caught without any error that little hand that was currently making trouble. This time she didn't use force to squeeze me painfully, but instead wrapped her soft, bone-free little hand seamlessly and tightly inside my wide, scalding palm. It was a drowning person catching onto the only floating log, or a mad dog clamping its jaws onto the only meat bone. The wineglass was placed back onto the tabletop. Jiang Wanning leaned her body back, sinking her entire person back into the sofa. Although the crimson color in her eyes had not completely faded, her murderous intent had already been restrained. "CEO Su, I will drink this wine for him, but after finishing this glass, the profit margins on this contract." A cruel smile curled at the corners of her lips, her eyes deep. "I want to add another 3%. When stepping out of the main door of the Orchid Pavilion Club, the night wind slapped our faces, carrying the chill of late autumn. I took a deep breath, attempting to dispel the foul smell of alcohol from my lungs. Just now in the private room, although Jiang Wanning had blocked the wine for me, That dagger-drawn, arrow-knocked atmosphere still left my hands and feet weak. The cold sweat on my back had completely soaked my shirt. Jiang Wanning walked by my side. Aside from her face being a few shades paler than usual, she looked no different from her usual high and mighty eldest Miss Self. Only I knew that the wrist she was clasping ached so much right now, it felt as if it were about to break. Right at the exact moment, a bodyguard pulled open the Ferrari's door. A slightly sarcastic and strange voice suddenly traveled out from the shadows of the parking lot. President Jiang is leaving just like this? I felt the hand gripping my wrist suddenly squeeze tight. A feminine, delicate-featured, middle-aged woman walked over unhurriedly with a few attendants. It was the eldest miss of the Rong family, Rong Shuer, the Jiang family's longtime arch-rival in the business world. Jiang Wanning stopped her steps, her expression indifferent. CEO Rong, what is your business? Rong Shuer took 2 steps closer, lowering her voice as she laughed. Nothing much. Just heard that CEO Su's gathering tonight angered our President Jiang quite a bit. Wanning, it's not that I, your aunt, want to lecture you, but with this illness of yours, you should still avoid coming out and moving around so much. My heart skipped a beat. Rong Shuer didn't just stop there. Instead, she took a step forward, using a voice that only a few people could hear, to continue viciously. I've actually heard that the frequency of your medication has been increasing lately. What a shame for the massive estate of the Jiang family. You must make sure not to follow in the footsteps of your lunatic mother. The corner of Rong Shuer's mouth curled into a cruel arc, stabbing word by word into Jiang Wanning's most bloody wound. Back then, when she jumped down from the 28th floor, her brains splashed all over the floor. If you were to follow in her footsteps too, this capital circle would lose a target to mock. I only felt a buzzing sound explode in my head. I looked at Jiang Wanning in terror. It was her mother. That was the absolute forbidden zone she could never touch, and even the source of this curse of hereditary mental illness. The air was dead silent. The surrounding bodyguards had already reached their hands toward their waists. With just a single look from Jiang Wanning, Rong Shuer tonight would have no hope of walking out of this parking lot vertically. However, the expected explosive rage did not occur. Under the dim yellow glare of the streetlights, Jiang Wanning actually smiled. Rong, you must be joking. I indeed ought to take care of my health. After all, she paused, stepped forward, and reached out her hand to help adjust Rong Shuer's collar. Her tone so gentle, it made one feel as if they had fallen into an ice cave. After all, if I were to die, who would be left to oversee the funeral of your Rong family? Rong Shuer's smile froze right on her face. Before she could even react, Jiang Wanning had already patted her on the shoulder, as if brushing off some sort of filth. Then she turned around, grabbed me, who was already staring blankly, and got straight into the car. The exact moment the car door closed, that smile on Jiang Wanning's face was like a torn mask, instantly vanishing without a single trace, replaced instead by a suffocating dead silence and gloom. She gave an order to the driver, her voice so hoarse it sounded as if it contained shards of glass. Drive back to Jiang Manor. Then, she pressed a button on the armrest box, and the black soundproof partition between the front and back seats slowly rose. The originally spacious back seat area instantly turned into a sealed, narrow, black cage. Inside this cage, only I remained, along with a wild beast teetering on the very edge of collapse. I shrank into the corner, not even daring to breathe heavily. Jiang Wanning leaned against the seat back, tilting her head up. With her eyes closed, one of her hands was gripping the genuine leather armrest of the seat in a death lock, her fingernails sinking deeply into the leather, making a grating friction sound that set one's teeth on edge. Her other hand was pressed hard against her temple. She was trembling, not from fear, but from extreme suppression. Was it because of the lunatic mother Rong Shuer mentioned just now? Jumping off the building, the brains, these words were currently playing on an infinite loop inside her mind, turning into a sharp noise that, blending with Su Manjing's earlier slamming sounds, unleashed a tsunami inside her head. She was using her last remaining shred of sanity to lock herself inside this narrow space, not wanting the driver up front to hear any commotion, nor wanting any outsider to see her currently wretched and battered state. Looking at her agonized look, my heart felt as if it were being violently gripped by something. I tentatively reached out my hand, wanting to pull her sleeve. Miss Jiang, don't touch me. Don't speak, and don't look at me. The current her was far too dangerous. She was afraid that the moment she opened her eyes, she wouldn't be able to resist drawing blood inside this narrow car cabin, even if it meant hurting me. The only partition closed up completely. The interior of the car fell into absolute darkness and dead silence. At this moment, inside Zhang Waning's mind, she must be experiencing a storm. Beyond anything an ordinary person could imagine. I pursed my dry lips. As a doctor, I knew that at times like this, a patient is at their most dangerous and vulnerable. As her medicine, I instinctively felt that I ought to do something, even if it just meant handing her a cup of water, or, like just now beneath the drinking table, hooking her finger. Plucking up my courage, I leaned my body forward slightly, wanting to shatter this suffocating dead silence. "Miss Jiang, shut up." In the darkness, those two words from the woman who originally had her eyes closed were squeezed out from between her gritted teeth, freezing, violent, and carrying not a single shred of warmth. I was so scared my entire body went rigid. My hand, extended in midair, stopped awkwardly as I was about to touch her. But I told you not to speak. Zhang Waning was using the last bit of her remaining sanity to keep that wild beast locked inside its cage, preventing it from lunging at the innocent person beside her. "Turn around and look out the window. Don't look at me. Don't look at the pathetic, lunatic-like mess I am right now." My heart felt as if it had been viciously twisted by something. I understood the warning in her tone, and I understood the restraint behind that warning. She was practically going mad, yet she was still afraid of hurting me. The rims of my eyes grew hot, and I silently withdrew my hand. Obediently, I turned my head to face the car window, no longer making a single sound, even deliberately suppressing my breathing. Working hard to minimize my sense of presence, the cabin fell back into a despairing dead silence, leaving only the friction sound of that string of Buddhist beads being spun faster and faster, becoming more and more ear-piercing. That sound echoed within the enclosed space, sounding like a final countdown for the impending explosion. Half an hour later, the Ferrari braked hard right at the entrance of Zhang Manor's main building. Before the car had even come to a complete stop, Zhang Waning had already shoved the car door open with a slam. Like a hurricane carrying frost, she stormed out of the car with massive strides. Her footsteps were stumbling yet incredibly fast, heading straight toward the villa's front door. The butler waiting at the entrance had just stepped forward to greet her, only to be forced back 2 steps by the terrifying hostility radiating from Zhang Waning. "Miss, get the hell away. No one is allowed to come near me." Zhang Waning let out a low roar, shoving aside the servants blocking her path, and headed straight for the second-floor study. An ear-splitting slam of a door resounded through the entirety of Zhang Manor. Immediately after came the sound of a lock turning. Subsequently, from inside the study came the dull thuds of heavy objects being viciously smashed against the wall. That was the destruction initiated to vent her agony. Sitting in the car, I looked at that tightly shut window, my hand still clutching that calming incense that midway I hadn't dared to hand out. I had just gotten out of the car, and before I could even manage to chase after her, that heavy mahogany door had already closed tightly before my face, shutting out all lines of sight. But it couldn't shut out the sound, the dull thudding sounds of heavy objects violently colliding with the walls seemed to make even the doorframe tremble. Immediately after came the sound of a bookshelf collapsing, the sound of books being torn to shreds, along with the sharp shattering of glass vessels being swept onto the floor and smashed into pieces. A one-sided destruction was taking place inside. It's over. This time, it's truly over. The servants had long since fled downstairs in terror, leaving only the butler and me in the entire second-floor hallway. How did it turn out like this? When we were at the club, she clearly managed to hold it in. The butler let out a heavy sigh, lowering his voice, a trace of trembling despair laced in his tone. "It's precisely because she held it in for too long. Mr. Gu, you don't know? The miss absolutely cannot bear to hear anyone mention the madam's affairs. That is her inner demon. That wicked woman of the wrong family deliberately provoked her in the parking lot today. The miss didn't blow up then, because she didn't want to lose her composure in front of outsiders, and also because she didn't want to scare you." My heart tightened violently. I remembered, inside that sealed dark space in the car, Zhang Waning would rather crush the Buddhist beads, would rather pinch her palms until they bled, just to roar at me not to look at her. So it turned out, she was already on the very brink of collapse back then. She locked herself away not to throw a tantrum, but to find a place where no one was around, to digest that explosive agony all by herself. Following that, another loud crash came from inside the room. This time, it sounded as if a chair had been smashed against the door panel. The butler shuddered violently all over, his old face deathly pale. He pointed tremblingly at that door. This is bad. This commotion isn't right. In the past, once the miss had her episode and smashed things, she should have quieted down. But this time she is looking for pain. Looking for pain? When a manic episode reaches the absolute extreme, the voices in her head will drive her insane. She needs physical pain to divert her attention. If no one goes in to stop her, the miss will absolutely have to see blood today before she can end this. See blood, Doc. These two words were like needles, stabbing straight into my ears. I thought of Jiang Wanting's pale and slender hands, the hands that had blocked wine for me and added food to my bowl, and just now in the car, were still trying their utmost to restrain themselves from hurting my hands. Could it be that she inside? Where is the spare key? Mr. Gu, give me the spare key. I am a doctor, and also her medicine. If I don't go in right now, am I supposed to wait for her to kill herself inside? The butler hesitated. Going in at a time like this was no different from bursting into a wild beast's cage. One could be accidentally harmed at any moment. But listening to the increasingly out-of-control commotion inside, he gritted his teeth, produced a copper-colored key from his waist, and said, Mr. Gu, please be extremely careful. I took the key, the cold metallic feel burning into my palm, heavy and substantial. I walked to that tightly closed mahogany door. Across the door panel, I felt as if I could hear the heavy, ragged breathing of the woman inside. That was the final tragic cry of a trapped beast. I took a deep breath, hesitated no longer, and inserted the key into the keyhole. The lock cylinder turned, and the door opened. The study door was pushed open, emitting a heavy, dull sound. I originally expected to see a floor full of messes and a manic lunatic smashing things around, but to my surprise, the room was in a death-like silence. The lights were not turned on, and the heavy curtains blocked the moonlight completely. The entire study was like a massive, pitch-black cavern, swallowing all light and sound. The air was filled with a thick, suffocating odor. It was the smell of dust and blood. My hand holding the medicine case was trembling slightly. Ms. Jiang, no one responded. Only that unsettling stillness remaining, weighing heavily upon my heart. I swallowed a mouthful of saliva, and using that weak beam of light filtering in from the hallway, carefully walked inside. Beneath my feet were nothing but broken porcelain shards and shredded papers. With every step I took, a tiny sound was made, sounding exceptionally grating in this quiet space. I was looking for her. Finally, in the deepest corner of the study, I saw Jiang Wanting sitting on the floor. With her back against a bookshelf, her long legs were currently bent casually. She just sat there so quietly in the darkness, resembling a plaster statue that had lost its soul. My heart tightened violently. I had never seen this side of Jiang Wanting. No explosive rage. Oh, no gloom. Only a bottomless void and numbness. Seemingly hearing footsteps, Jiang Wanting lifted her eyelids slightly. There was no focus in those phoenix eyes. They were pitch black, like a pool of stagnant water. In her world, my voice was very distant and blurry. What flooded her mind at this moment were countless sharp noises. The sound of the wind when her mother jumped off the building, the sound of bones shattering, the vicious curses of wrong Shuer, and the loud crash of colliding wine glasses. It was too noisy. The blood vessels in her brain felt as if they were about to explode. Those sounds were like rusty saws, sawing back and forth across her nerves. Jiang Wanting looked blankly at that speck of bright red firelight. Since the pain in her head couldn't be stopped, then she would use another more direct, more intense physical pain to mask it. As long as her body hurt more, her head wouldn't hurt anymore. This was the survival rule she had learned over the years inside the asylum. Jiang Wanting raised her hand expressionlessly, looking at the back of her left hand, at that ferocious black thorn tattoo. It was tattooed there to cover up scars left behind from the past, symbolizing pain and restraint. The next second, she made a move that scared me out of my wits. She actually took that cigarette butt, which was burning at its brightest and highest temperature, and slowly, without any hesitation, pressed it down against that cluster of thorn tattoos on the back of her hand. At that exact instant, I felt as if I could hear the sound of flesh being scorched by extreme heat. A nauseating smell of burning, like the scent of seared meat, instantly diffused through the air. and illuminated by that dismal red glow. Jiang Wanning didn't even furrow her brow once. This scene was far too terrifying, far too tragic. My pupils contracted violently, and all the blood in my body surged backward toward the crown of my head at this split. My instinct as a doctor, combined with my heartache as the medicine she had protected all the way, at this very moment, completely crushed my fear of her status. There was no eldest miss of the capital circle, nor was there any creditor. The only thing in my eyes right now was a patient undergoing self-destruction. The medicine case in my hand hit the floor with a loud clang. The bottles and jars inside rolling all over the ground. I couldn't care about any of that. Disregarding everything else, I lunged toward the woman in the corner. Jiang Wanning, are you insane? I rushed in front of her, and without even thinking, reached out directly and smacked away from her hand that cigarette butt that was still smoking. With trembling hands, I cradled Jiang Wanning's left hand, which had been burned into a bloody mess. In the center of that originally exquisite cold thorn tattoo, there was now a charred, deep crater. The surrounding skin was red, swollen, and blistering, looking absolutely shocking. How could you? How could you do this to yourself? Doesn't it hurt? My voice was choked up, broken. And Jiang Wanning, whose cigarette butt had been smacked away by me, only at this moment, seemed to finally snap out from that sealed world of hers. She blinked sluggishly. What was he crying about over there? The person hurting was herself. So why did he look like he was in more pain than she was? Kneeling on the floor that was covered in broken glass shards, holding tightly onto Jiang Wanning's newly injured left hand with both of my hands, I used the weak light to see the wound clearly. The center of that black thorn tattoo, which originally symbolized abstinence and danger, had currently been scorched open by the high temperature. Charred black tissue, upturned raw red meat, along with a ring of terrifying blisters, rapidly surfacing around the area. Just looking at it made me feel an intense pain. As a medical student, I had seen countless hideous wounds, but never once had it been like right now, causing my heart to ache so much that even my breathing was trembling. How could she bring herself to do it? How could she treat herself like this? Jiang Wanning, at this moment, looked as if she had just been forcibly dragged out from that closed world filled with noise. She rolled her eyeballs sluggishly, her gaze landing on my frantic face. The terror in my eyes was still there, but what filled them even more was a sorrow and pity that were nearly overflowing. Pity? To think that someone would actually show this kind of expression to a lunatic like me. The corner of Jiang Wanning's mouth twitched stiffly, the hollow deadness in her eyes not dissipating. Instead, because the pleasure of her self-destruction had been interrupted, a surge of violent irritability welled up. Who permitted you to come in? She wanted to pull her hand back, but I held onto it tightly in a deathlock. Gu Yanqin, I told you to get the hell out, before I feel like choking you to death. A filthy, damaged monster like me, with the blood of a lunatic flowing inside, only deserves to rot away in the darkness. If it were anyone else, hearing this kind of warning filled with murderous intent, they would have long since fled out the door in terror. But I didn't. I looked into those hollow, startling eyes of hers, looking at the spikes she intentionally put up all over her body, just to drive me away. I didn't let go of her hand, but instead gripped it even tighter. I'm not leaving. I am your doctor. If I leave, what will happen to your hand? Do you want it to be ruined? She roared back at herself. This little rabbit, who usually didn't even dare to speak aloud, had actually roared at the king of hell of the capital circle. Jiang Wanning was stunned. Right at the exact split second she froze in shock, I had already, with frantic movements, pulled out a tube of burn ointment that I carried with me. Using my trembling fingers to twist open the cap, I squeezed out a large dollop of the clear, cooling ointment. Don't move. Please don't move. Yet my movements were unbelievably gentle. The pad of my slightly cool finger, stained with the ointment, carefully applied it to the edges of that hideous wound. That was a touch Jiang Wanning had never experienced before. It didn't hurt, it was very cool, and very soft, and very soft. That cooling sensation, traveling along her nerve endings, actually managed to miraculously override the original, excruciating burning pain. Jiang Wanning's muscles, which had originally tensed up wanting to push me away, loosened up unconsciously. Using the dim light, she looked at this man kneeling before her. He was trembling. He was afraid. Yet he still stubbornly cradled her, battered and broken hand, as if cradling some rare and priceless treasure. After applying the ointment, I lowered my head and leaned close to the wound, gently blowing a breath of air over it. It won't hurt if I blow on it. Jiang Wanning, don't be like this. I will cure you. Don't harm yourself. It hurts. See, ours S2 have to do it. These words, it hurts, were like a heavy hammer, viciously smashing through that layer of illness that had been in Jiang Wanning's heart for over 20 years. From childhood to adulthood, everyone had been afraid of her. Afraid of her going mad, afraid of her hurting people. Even her father, when she had an episode, would only have people lock her up and inject sedatives, or keep far away from her. His eyes filled completely with disgust and fear. No one had ever asked her if it hurt. No one had ever felt heartache over the injuries on her body. Jiang Wanning only felt as if her throat were blocked by a wad of cotton, and those sharp noises in her mind that were forcing her to want to commit suicide actually vanished miraculously at this moment, replaced instead by the broken voice of the boy before her and his clumsy yet gentle sounds of blowing on her wound. This voice was so beautiful, more beautiful than any music in this world. Inside Jiang Wanning's hollow, dead eyes, a sliver of focus slowly appeared. That bit of focus gradually converged, finally condensing into my reflection. The ointment was applied. That layer of transparent, gel-like substance covered the charred, hideous wound, isolating it from the air, and also temporarily stopping that piercing, burning pain. But Jiang Wanning did not get better. On the contrary, when the excruciating pain used to numb her nerves receded, another, deeper, more terrifying reaction swept over her. Jiang Wanning's entire body was trembling violently beyond control. The air conditioning in the study wasn't turned down very low, yet she felt as if she were stripped naked and thrown into an ice house. That was the physiological collapse brought by the sharp recession of adrenaline after a manic episode exploded, and also the exhaustion of a person who had lived in darkness for years, following extreme self-harm and self-destruction. In the quiet space, one could even hear the uncontrollable chattering of her teeth. In front of Jiang Wanning, my hands were still cradling her injured left hand. I could feel her trembling, and I could also clearly perceive her helplessness and vulnerability at this moment. That Jiang Wanning, who called the shots in the capital circle, and was completely insufferable. That Jiang Wanning, who just a moment ago wanted to choke me to death, and told me to get the hell out, apparently looked as fragile as a thin sheet of paper that would break at a single poke. Are you cold? Jiang Wanning didn't answer. Or perhaps she couldn't make a sound at all. She only mechanically tried to pull her hand back out of my hands, wanting to curl her entire person back into that dark corner. Don't look at me in such a pathetic state. It's too ugly. Looking at her dodging movements, my heart felt as if it were stuffed with a wad of cotton soaked in vinegar, swelling with a sour ache. She had driven herself to this point, precisely because she couldn't bear to hear others call her mother a lunatic. Nor could she bear those curses. She wasn't a monster. She was just a patient with no one to care for her. I'm not weaving, I sniffled. In the next second, I made a bold move. I crawled forward a step, and even though the carpet was covered everywhere with broken porcelain shards and glass fragments, sending a sharp, stinging pain through my knees, I didn't stop. I came right in front of Jiang Wanning, and then I opened my arms, resembling a little bird wanting to warm a frozen crabbler, and hugged her tightly without any hesitation. Jiang Wanning's body, which had still been trembling violently, at that exact instant looked as if it were hit by a binding spell, suddenly going rigid. What is this warm, soft touch? Filled with vibrant life? It wasn't a contact made of flinching because of fear, nor was it a forced compliance just to stay alive. Miss Jiang, don't tremble anymore, don't hurt anymore, all right? I'm right here. Jiang Wanning sat there rigidly, her hands hanging in midair, completely at a loss. Inside her mind, that voice that had been screaming at her to die suddenly fell silent. Her world was left with only the voice of the boy in her arms. You told me to get the hell out, but I am your medicine. How can medicine leave? I am right here, and I'm not going anywhere. I am the medicine. I am here. These few simple words were like a beam of light, brutally tearing apart that haze over Jiang Wanning's head that had weighed down for over 20 years. At that exact split second, Jiang Wanning felt something sprout from the dirt of her heart, which had long since turned into a barren wasteland, that chill seeping out from the gaps of her bones. was receding at an astonishing speed, replaced instead by a scalding hot current surging up from her limbs, nearly on the verge of setting her on fire. He didn't despise her. He had seen her most crazed, most damaged, and most wretched side, yet he still chose to hold her tightly. The rims of Gu Yankin's eyes flared with a terrifying red. This time, she didn't push me away. Her hands hanging in midair trembled as they slowly fell, landing upon my spine. The exact split second that intact right hand of hers touched my spine, her entire person felt as if hit by a high-voltage current. That long-lost, vibrant body temperature drilled frantically into her body through her fingertips. Over the course of 25 years, this was the first time that Jiang Wanning, at her most pathetic and ugly hour during an episode, had not been avoided by people as if she were a plague. No one stabbed her with sedatives, no one locked her up with chains, and no one looked at her with eyes meant for a monster. There was only a warm man, carrying the scent of medicine, disregarding the glass fragments all over the floor. To kneel before her, actively opening his arms, to pull this filthy, broken body of hers right into his embrace. Don't hurt anymore, I'm right here. This sentence was like the final key that unlocked Pandora's box. The dead ash-like void in the depths of Jiang Wanning's eyes collapsed rapidly within this single second, replaced instead by a madness exploding out from the very depths of her soul, a frantic desire sufficient to burn her sanity to ashes. Not enough. Just holding her like this was completely not enough. Every single cell inside her body was screaming. That was the rebound after her skin hunger had been suppressed to the absolute extreme. She had been cold for far too long. This body had rotted away in the darkness for far too long. Now, having caught a sudden glimpse of light, she only wanted to grip this beam of light in a deathlock. Crying is fine too. In the next second, that person, who just a moment ago had been in a passive state, suddenly moved. Even though the back of her left hand still bore the burn wound that had just been coated with medicine, he couldn't feel the pain at all. He suddenly tightened his arms, and the strength that exploded out in that instant was shockingly immense, as if he were about to snap my waist. The last sliver of space between us completely vanished. Miss Jiang, I was a bit panicked. Her strength was too great, so great that it made me feel suffocated. But Jiang Wanning couldn't hear me at all. Her sanity had already snapped, and what dominated this physical body right now was an instinct named greed. She lowered her head, burying that pale, beautiful face into the crook of my neck. It wasn't just a kiss. It was plundering. Her icy nose pressed against my warm skin, sending wave after wave of shivers through me. So fragrant, Jiang Wanning murmured indistinctly, and then I felt a warm, wet sensation. She was nuzzling my skin with her lips. No, it wasn't just nuzzling. Because she craved that real touch too much, Jiang Wanning couldn't even control herself from opening her mouth, using her teeth to gently grind against that small patch of soft meat on the side of my neck. Jiang Wanning, be gentler. The study was dead silent, save for the subtle rustling of clothing friction and the woman's increasingly intoxicated breathing. That pathological attachment grew frantically in this dark corner. Jiang Wanning kept her eyes closed, her cheek tightly pressed against the position of my carotid artery, listening to the powerful heartbeat coming from it. Her frantic, unsettled heart finally dropped back into place miraculously. It's alive, it's warm. This belongs to her. After a long time, Jiang Wanning finally stopped her near-manic grind. You came over here on your own. Since I've held on to you, don't even think about letting go for the rest of your life. I was being squeezed so hard by her that I could barely breathe, listening in a daze to this vow that sounded like a curse. I didn't know yet that at this exact moment, I had personally opened the cage holding the wild beast and offered myself up as a sacrificial lamb, trapped inside that cage forever. The air in the study finally stopped being so suffocatingly tense. The violent aura that was on the verge of destroying everything during that long and forceful embrace slowly receded like a tide. The crimson in the depths of Jiang Wanning's eyes dissipated, and her sanity returned, but she did not let go of her hands. On the contrary, she felt as if she had found a certain switch to anchor her soul, and that switch was the man currently holding her. I knelt on the floor, my legs having long since gone numb, and furthermore, having maintained a posture of being tightly squeezed by her the whole time, my waist felt like it was about to break. Miss Jiang, are you doing any better? The floor is cold and covered in broken glass. Let's get up first, all right? Jiang Wanning didn't move. She rested her chin against my body. But the arms holding me didn't loosen even a single millimeter. Then let go of me first. I'll go pack up the medicine case. Your hand still needs to be bandaged. Before I could finish speaking, the woman, who had been as quiet as a big cat just a moment ago, suddenly knit her brows. She sucked in a sharp breath of cold air, and lifted her head, her pale face, revealing an unconcealed look of pain. My heart tightened, and my medical instincts instantly made me tense up. What's wrong? Is it your head? My heart tightened, and my medical instincts instantly made me tense up. Jiang Wanning lowered her eyelids, raising her burned left hand, and waved it in front of me. My hand hurts, a piercing pain. I looked at that hideous wound, my heart softening, just about to say that I would blow on it for her. But Jiang Wanning raised her right hand again, pressing hard against her temple, her brow furrowed into a tight knot. My head hurts too, like a saw is cutting through it. Before I could even speak, she placed her hand over her heart instead, looking at me with a lingering gaze. It hurts here too. I was dumbfounded. That was the position of her heart. Chest pain. Could it be angina? Or an unstable heart rate? Did the episode just now cause a complication? As I spoke, I reached out to check her pulse, but Jiang Wanning dodged my hand. Those eyes of hers staring straight at me, her tone both aggrieved and dangerous. If you leave, then everything will hurt. My hand froze in midair. I finally understood. This wasn't any complication. This was pure shameless behavior. That decisive, ruthless eldest miss of the capital circle was currently taking full advantage of being a patient, to blatantly play the victim. I let out a helpless sigh. I'm not leaving. I just want to help you back to your room to rest. Jiang Wanning stared at me for a few seconds, seemingly evaluating the truth of my words. Finally, she mercifully loosened her grip a bit, but she still kept her grip on my wrist, not letting go. She held out her hand matter-of-factly. Resigned to my fate, I acted as a human crutch, helping this tall woman up from the carpet. Jiang Wanning pressed almost her entire body weight against me. That scalding body temperature transmitted through the thin fabric of our clothes, making my skin flush with heat. The two of us walked out of that completely devastated. Study. Right next door was the master bedroom. Pushing open those heavy double doors, a crisp, cold scent of cedarwood slammed into our faces. Jiang Wanning's bedroom was massive, so spacious that it felt a bit desolate. Right in the center sat a giant, custom-made black bed. Please lie down and rest. I helped her to the bedside, just about to turn around and return to my own room, when my wrist tightened as a massive force hit me. My entire body was dragged straight down, falling face first into that massive, soft bed. Before I could even struggle to climb back up, a soft body had already blanketed itself over me. I was scared out of my wits, using both my hands and feet trying to crawl out. Don't move. Jiang Wanning hugged me from behind, one hand locking around my waist and one long leg, viciously pinning down both of my legs. Sleep here tonight. This goes against propriety. Men and women shouldn't be this close. And furthermore, you are my medicine. If the medicine isn't kept by my side, what am I supposed to do if I have an episode in the middle of the night? Are you trying to let me die from the pain? But there are no buts. Jiang Wanning buried her face in the crook of my neck, taking a deep, long sniff of the calming scent on my body. Her frantic nerves finally calmed down completely. Sleep. She closed her eyes, her voice carrying a heavy fatigue and satisfaction. I'll believe you when pigs fly. You said you wouldn't touch me, but right now you're using both your hands and feet, tangled around me like an octopus. What is that supposed to mean? Jiang Wanning's arm lay across my waist. That injured left hand, to prevent touching the wound, was deliberately held aloft as it rested on me. Meanwhile, her leg was dominantly pinning my legs down, leaving me completely unable to move. Slowly, the sound of breathing behind me became steady and long. Jiang Wanning had truly fallen asleep. This was likely the fastest and most peaceful sleep she had gotten in years. My originally rigid body, upon hearing that even breathing, slowly relaxed as well. I turned my head, and using the moonlight, stole a glance at the sleeping profile of the woman behind me. That face, which was usually so cold, currently lacked any defenses, her long eyelashes drooping down, looking actually a bit well-behaved. She really thinks of herself as a baby. That sense of fear in my heart had dissolved a great deal without my realizing it, replaced instead by a helpless fondness. Forget it, seeing how much pain she was in today. I'll just treat this as acting as a body pillow for a night. I let out a sigh, and inside the woman's warm embrace, smelling that scent of cedarwood, I actually closed my eyes as well, drifting off without noticing. After I fell asleep, the woman, who was supposed to be fast asleep, slowly opened her eyes. In the darkness, Jiang Wanning's eyes were completely clear, lacking even a single shred of sleepiness. She looked at the man beside her, the corner of her mouth curling into a sinister arc. I've caught you. Don't even think about running away for the rest of your life.